Okay, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Adam. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Energy Code Board meeting. Great to see you guys. We've got a lot to cover today, so we're going to just go ahead and dive right in as we usually do. Adam, if you could make me a co-host, that would be lovely.
One of these days, I'll just remember to do that.
There we go. Okay, awesome. All right. Well, like I said, welcome everyone. Thanks everybody for being here. As always, taking time out of your days to be with us to talk code. So our agenda today is going to be, first we'll go through the agenda. We'll approve the meeting minutes from last time. We'll give the board a chance to bring up any and all items that they'd like to discuss from the public comments that you guys received. Then we are going to take a good chunk of time this morning, or excuse me, this afternoon, to review the process that we're going to take the board through for giving you guys the draft code, your review of the draft code, and then how all of that's going to come together in our in some of our upcoming meetings for when we host our preliminary vote. So we'll talk you guys through where we are today through the end of March. So you have a line of sight to where we're headed and what's going to be expected of you between now and then to help us finalize this code package. We'll pause, make sure you guys don't have any questions or any suggestions to make the process easier for you guys. We are open to hearing some suggestions if you guys have them. And then after that first 30 minutes, we'll hope to have the final process and expectations set for moving forward with those draft code reviews. And then we'll move into our topic discussion for the day, which is going to be to wrap up the electric ready code provisions for residential. And then we'll move in the second part of our meeting to discussing our electric ready code standard for small commercial and small multifamily. And then we'll wrap it up. So with that, any questions on the agenda? All look good? Okay, and then would love to make to move forward with the approval of meeting minutes. So do I have a motion from a board member to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes as printed.
Second, Kevin.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Kevin. All in favor, say aye.
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 And any opposed? Okay, thank you, everybody. Meeting minutes are approved. We'll move on now to public comments and code proposals. So I'll pause, and if any board member would like to bring up any code proposals or public comments that were submitted, you may do so now. Carolyn.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that we did receive some comments from the Colorado Solar and Storage Association, and I specifically wanted to call out the comments related to the cap roof penetration sleeve and their recommendation not to require this provision due to its limited benefit from an industry perspective. I think when we talked about this earlier, we had included it and had conversation about roof angle and some of those components. I'm in favor of supporting their recommendation, but I just wanted to bring that forward as I know we'll be moving to the code language first, and just wanted to flag that as one of the things from their feedback that I felt was worth calling out compared to where our discussion left off. Some of the other comments they made are consistent with discussion we already had and guidance I think we already provided to you, Kim, but that one was a little bit different, so I wanted to flag it.
Yeah,
I want to agree with that. I think that it's really important to note that those provisions were for the direct benefit of those industries, and that they're saying that that's time, money, and effort wasted because they're probably not going to use them. I think we need to give that strong consideration.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Carolyn. And anyone else want to chime in on that piece? I'm just pulling up the code ready or the code language as we have it to see where we landed with that piece. So as soon as I find it, I can throw that in the chat. It might be that it was taken out because I'm not seeing it in here.
I think it's only in residential, Kim, so you might look.
Oh, thank you.
Make
I
sure
see.
you're looking at that.
Okay. So we do have it in the code language, and I will just chat what's written right now, so you guys can see it. And the way that we structured it, because we did have a bit of discussion around this at our Solar Ready meeting, for when conduit or the wiring is going to be run on the exterior of the structure, that piece is not required. And so we, as you can see in the chat, we kept the capped roof penetration requirement, and added the exception that if they're going to run it on the outside, that they don't have to do that. Kristen and then Carolyn.
Following up on last board's meeting, we had a discussion, you may recall, around cold climate heat pumps. And in between that meeting and this one, the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnership, or NEEP, very kindly offered to share their compiled list of cold climate heat pumps available for sale in North America. So I will be sure to send that product list to the members of the Energy Code Board. It is proprietary, so please do not forward or share, but it does contain thousands of cold climate heat pumps, including hundreds of both ducted and non-ducted units that work down to -20 Fahrenheit or below. And that is in excess of the requirements in all Colorado code jurisdictions. Thanks.
Thank you, Kristen. And I'd just say, please send that to me first so that I can forward it to the board.
Will do.
Thank you. All right. Carolyn.
Thank you. And back to the COSA comments. I just wanted to acknowledge there was another recommendation they had about requiring a minimum size for the residential. I still support where we actually landed in not requiring that, because I think there's much lower risk in the residential side that somebody's going to go with like a single panel just to comply with or just to avoid a requirement. I think where we landed appropriately on the commercial side to specify the minimum threshold and leave it there and not allow for an exemption where a system is included remains the right one. I just wanted to acknowledge that I read the comment and the feedback, and I wasn't intending to change my position on that one. The others I think were consistent. So thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Andrew.
With respect to this specific piece, with the feedback from the solar providers, if the intent is to provide it after, how would one know that up front? Because I don't recall, at least us yet, agreeing on any of the specific provisions. I recall the general discussion, but it feels like today there seems to be concurrence on the actual language, and I didn't think we were there.
Andrew, yeah, so where we are right now is we have had those general discussions. I think Carolyn was alluding to the discussions that we had as a board, and where you guys provided general consensus and direction to our team. Our team has the draft code language package ready to go for Solar Ready and EV Ready, based on the initial discussions and guidance from the board that we will be sharing following this meeting. So you are correct. Nobody has seen that, and we'll be talking in the next part of this meeting, or the next part of the agenda, about how we'll ask for your feedback and review of that draft code package once it's sent today.
But I think I'm talking about two different things. With respect to the feedback specifically for the capped roof penetration sleeve, if it is the intent and preference, and my understanding from discussions with multiple solar providers is they will, what was provided is generally their position that they will not use anything that's pre-installed for one or more reasons. So how does is the board doing anything with that in response to its general consensus, whatever the general consensus is today?
I think our recommendation, or at least the recommendation I made, Andrew, is that we not require things to be within code that do not serve the benefit that's intended. And so the feedback from the industry was that they would not use the roof penetration. And so therefore we're recommending not requiring that to be included in the code. That's my recommendation.
And just to speak to process. So I think right now we're just allowing board members to share their thoughts and recommendations based on the public input. The formal way that we'll incorporate that feedback and recommendation is through the review process of this draft code package that we'll speak to in a moment. So I don't think today we need to come to consensus on whether or not we want to approve or disapprove public comments, more just allowing the board to bring up things that they want to share their thoughts on, and then we will have a process in which the board provides that more specific feedback on the code language. Does that help? Thanks, Andrew. Tim and then Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Tim Pate. Just for clarity, I did look at that public comment, but to maybe help clarify again, I don't know if you could pull that up, but just to generally summarize what that was, I think it was just from the solar industry, the recommendation would be basically they don't think it's needed because they won't use it. So why put it in? Is that correct?
I believe that is correct. I'm looking to pull up the language as well.
Yeah,
Tim,
they looked at removing the following boulder and removing RB 103.6, which is specific to the roof cap roof penetration sleeve.
Understood. That's what I thought. So we reached out to some couple. I had one of my staff members who does our solar reviews reach out to some of the solar companies that do the majority of the permits, and the response we got, and I don't have the names, so it doesn't really matter either, is that if the raceway was provided inside of the house, they would use it if they were able to. And sometimes there's problems with the installation, maybe too many 90s, whatever that might be, or locations. So it wasn't that they would never use it. They would use it maybe. So maybe a suggestion would be as we move forward, I don't know, we have some language in here, but we do some kind of an exception. I don't know if that muddies up the whole process either. Just a comment.
Thanks, Tim. And Kevin, I'll pass back to you.
Sure. Do we want to respond to Tim's comment first? Because I was going to go to a couple of different comments. I mean, the one thought on that, Tim, is that the absence of a requirement doesn't disallow it from happening. I think that might have been a triple negative. But, if somebody wants to put that in, they certainly still can. But requiring it seems to be the point that COSA is saying, please don't require that. If somebody knows how to competently do that, they're partnering with the builder or what have you, that seems like a way to accomplish that rather than trying to insist on everything. And then from just the other comments I wanted to highlight just to get the other board members' opinion on, in comment 4, which I'm not totally clear who that was from, but mostly it talked about Denver's levels, and in particular, I wanted to see if in the code language we have proposed, towards the end of their comment, they make a really good point about multifamily dwellings and the energy management system that can provide load management, because that addresses a lot of the upstream electricity infrastructure that some of the other comments point to in terms of grid infrastructure cost, that looking at peak load simultaneous for all of these things is probably what creates some of those really large projections for numbers. And then I just wanted to see what the other board members' opinion was about comment number 2 from Ron, I think, from Excel, about the multiple fuel types and just different climate zones, and what were thoughts on accommodation for that. I think it's a good point that gas to a home, depending on where it is and depending on of reliability of transmission in very remote areas, may be a more efficient type. So I just was curious to hear other folks' opinions on that item. It was item 2 of comment 5, I believe. It's most.
Thanks, Kevin. So first, does anyone have any responses to Kevin's comments? Tim and then Carolyn.
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Kevin, for the comment. Excuse me. But I guess I thought that the intent of this legislation across the board would be to put in the basic infrastructure, as you might call it, to accommodate the EV ready, PV ready, electric ready, and to reduce the costs in the future of, retrofitting. So I don't believe that the feedback I've gotten from electricians that work in our community in Broomfield is that the cost to provide this conduit raceway inside at the rough is like a drop in the bucket. I don't have an exact number, but it's not very much. Now, granted, it could get put in where it's not really usable or feasible for a particular solar company. But my opinion would be to go along with the generic or the intent of this legislation is that it should be in so that it is there. And that, so if the solar company says, well, I'm not going to run it on the outside, which we have a lot of them that do on the outside, but if they want to do it on the inside, then they have that. So that would be my opinion based on my understanding of the legislation.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim, and then Carolyn.
So I think there's 3 there that I'll speak to. So I think Kevin had asked the first question about Denver and the load management, and Kim can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe where we landed is recommending that we consider the provisions around modification to the requirements where load management systems are included. And so I think it was some of those best practices. So I think we did try and address it, so not require it, but to encourage it through alleviating some of the capacity needs within the code. So I think that's the answer to that question. I think my view on Rob's comment number 2 is I feel pretty strongly that we aren't doing anything that is determining customer choice at this point in time. As far as new construction, I think to Tim's point, we're solely ensuring that they have the ability to adapt in the future, and we aren't specifying all electric requirements with what we're doing. We're adopting 2021 IECC with electric ready provisions. So I think we're in a solid place there. I think to Tim's point on the solar, I think I more commonly hear from a high percentage of installers in industry that they really strive not to go within the residential home to utilize that raceway and or penetration. And so I am trying to be very cognizant of the conversations we had about mitigating first costs if they are not going to deliver the cost savings long term. And I just haven't seen a good nexus between cost savings resulting from providing that, or a cost premium resulting from not providing it. So I would still err on the side of forgoing requiring the actual raceway and just allow it within the space for it within the construction documents, and adopt the recommendation about the roof penetration and foregoing that. Just again, because I just don't see the material incremental or cost reduction that would come for a later retrofit. I think the biggest thing is addressing the obstructions on the roof, ensuring there's a good solar zone, and that you have the panel capacity. Like that's where your biggest savings is going to come from. So that's my feedback on those questions.
Thank you, Carolyn. We'll go to Kristen next.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to the comment from Excel Energy as a member of this code board. And I wanted to just express my concern that this is not an appropriate forum to lobby or relitigate what has already been decided by our legislature. We have a mandate for electric ready. And I personally feel as a code board member that it's inappropriate to lobby for exemptions for gas. That's if you want to lobby, take that to the legislature, not to your fellow experts on the code board. And then regarding cold climates, one of the reasons that I pulled together that list for fellow energy code board members was to demonstrate that there are cold climate heat pumps that do work in every single Colorado climate zone. So I do not feel that we need to try and carve out exemptions for gas for climate zone 6 or colder. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. And Kim, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you. And I wanted to thank Kristen for her efforts with that. I also have been looking into my heat pump documentation and webinars and educational information that has been done across the state in the last couple of years. And as I filter through that, I will also send that to you as well, Kim, for dissemination to the group if it's helpful. I wanted to just make a quick comment on, let's see, it's comment number 5 and it's item 3 related to greenhouse gas emissions and comparison between electricity and natural gas. One of the roles that I have played at Eco Action Partners over the last over 10 years that we've been tracking our greenhouse gas emissions is to track the comparison in emissions factors between a unit of energy of natural gas and a unit of energy of electricity. And we are in a rural area served by Tri-State, which has been notoriously known as one of the most coal-intensive utilities serving our state. That has changed or is changing. Let's put it that way. They have really progressive goals, and the emissions factor comparison changed about 4 to 5 years ago, such that now a unit of electricity uses or emits less greenhouse gas emissions than natural gas, using the emissions factors that are accurate for tri-state territories. So I just wanted to bring that up, that not only has that comparison already changed, but as we move forward into increasing renewable energy on our electric grid, the electricity factor, emissions factor, will continue to decrease and will continue to be beneficial to electrify. Thank you.
And that's for heat pumps, right? I've done emission factor work too.
It's for all forms of electrification. It's just comparing a unit of natural gas to the equivalent unit of electricity, using BTUs as the common factor.
Would love to follow up on that separate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Any other board members want to bring forward or share public comments with the board? Okay. Well, thank you all for reviewing the public comments and bringing forward those that you wanted to share with the board. Again, the way in which you can sort of incorporate the changes you'd like to see if they're not already captured in the code language will be through the review process that we will go through right now. So this is really, 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 really important. I can't say that enough. The next 30 minutes, I would love your undivided attention, because this is really, the most critical piece, most critical month for you guys to be dialed into this process so that we have all of the feedback and insights we need from you guys to finalize this code board, or excuse me, the code package. So I'm going to go through. The next couple of slides are going to be a review of dates. And so any board member who has their calendar available, in 3 slides, I'll have actually a calendar view of what March is going to look like. I would recommend that folks pull up their calendars and throw these dates on your calendars so that you are dialed in and remember all of the deadlines I'm about to share with you, because if we miss a deadline, there's not going to be a lot I can do to help you share your feedback with us. So we'll go through this date by date. So starting today, Thursday, February 23rd, we have our meeting 8, where we're going to be discussing electric readiness for residential and small commercial and multifamily. This evening, before the end of the day, you guys will be sent the draft EV Ready code package and the draft Solar Ready code package. The way that these packages are going to come through to you guys, it will be in PDFs. So you'll have a PDF with the full residential and solar ready, residential, commercial, solar ready, and EV ready language. And then we will provide a separate PDF that has all of that same language with explanatory notes from our team on how we took the board's feedback and changed sort of the standardized code language we reviewed together, or added things or took away things based on our discussions as a board. So you will get a clean version and an explanatory version of each one of the code packages. In addition to that, you will be sent a link to a survey, and the survey is where you're going to provide all of your feedback and input to us on what that looks like. And we'll talk about that just a little bit more in a moment. I'm going to keep cruising through the dates. So today you will be sent draft EV and solar ready code language. You are going to be given 1 week to review both code language packages and send any and all feedback that you have to our team. And again, I'll talk about what that feedback is going to look like in a moment. So all of your review of these 2 code packages will be due by Thursday, March 2nd, end of day. If you do not get us your feedback by Thursday, March 2nd, end of day, we will not be able to incorporate it in our board discussions, in our voting, and everything that's going to follow. And I hate to be the person drawing a hard line, but we are on such a tight timeline that we don't have any opportunity to miss any one of these deadlines. So Wednesday, March 1st, we'll have our meeting 9 discussion. Sorry, I'm bouncing a bit, but Wednesday, March 1st, we'll meet and we'll wrap up our discussion on electric readiness. We'll also talk through the variance process during that meeting. On Thursday of March 2nd, so next Thursday, like I said, the feedback on the solar ready and the EV ready amendments are due. Throw that in your calendars. Friday, March 3rd, our team is going to take all of the proposed changes that we received from the board. We're going to compile them and we're going to send them out to the board as soon as humanly possible. So again, if you missed that March 2nd deadline, we don't have time to wait for you on Friday to compile all the results. On Friday, we will send the entire board all of the proposed changes from the various board members so that you guys have a chance to read through those, decide if you like them or you don't like them, because right around the corner on Monday, March 6th, we will be voting on hosting our preliminary vote on the EV Ready and Solar Ready code language. I recognize that is a very unfortunate timeline that you guys will actually probably need to spend a little bit of time over the weekend reviewing those code proposals, because we'll send them on Friday as soon as we're physically able to. And then Monday is going to be our chance to vote on those, and our meeting starts at noon. So you'll also have Monday morning to look at those. Moving along our timeline, Wednesday, March 8th, we will send you guys the draft electric ready code language and the draft variance process that we come up with. And then you guys will have 1 week again to review that, complete the survey, and give us your feedback. I will say it again, if you do not give us your feedback by the end of day, Wednesday, March 15th, it will not be accepted. So put that date in your calendars. That is when we need you to respond to the survey. On Thursday, March 16th, we'll do the same thing where we compile all the proposals that we receive from the board in a very easily readable and understandable format. We will send that all back out to the board, so you guys have a chance to see those code language proposal changes. And then you'll have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday to review those code proposals. And then Monday, March 20th, we will be voting on the electric ready code proposals. After our Monday, March 20th meeting, the Lotus and CEO team will have 2 days to incorporate any and all changes that were voted on during meetings 11 and meetings 10 into the final code package. And then we will share that code package out to the public on Wednesday, March 22nd. This is so that the public has at least, I believe it's 5 business days to review the code package so that they can come prepared to our public comment meeting with any thoughts that they want to share. The following week, Tuesday, March 28th, we'll have that public comment meeting. And then we will, at that meeting, we'll also have time for the board to discuss the public comments. We will make any changes needed as indicated by the board to the code language package so that, and send that code language package out. I think our goal is Thursday, and apologies, it got missed in this table. And then on Friday, we will host the final vote. So I'm going to talk through, you guys probably have some questions. I'm going to talk through a couple of things, but yeah, Tim.
Yeah, thank you. I know you might go over this eventually, but that meeting for the public comment, are you going to set that up with some speaking, like kind of Robert rules of order type, 2 minutes, 3 minutes or something like that, so we can, people need to be concise and we can listen to everybody, assuming there's going to be a lot of people?
Yes, that's a great question. We don't have, I don't think that format specifically mapped out yet, but the idea, the intent that Adam and I have discussed is to allow folks 1 to 2 minutes max, and keep it very, very tight. So you have a minute. As soon as your minute's up, we're cutting you off and it's on to the next person so that we can make sure we save time for everybody's comments. Okay.
Follow-up question, sorry.
No, okay.
And I guess, would there be that embedded potential for board members to ask for some clarification or questions? I mean, I'm just used to, I've been on the ICC code change committees for so many years and it's set up pretty structured, but you have that ability to, the committee members have that ability to maybe ask a little bit of question, but then sometimes that gets really drawn out.
That's a great thought and question, Tim. And I don't know that I have an answer right now, but Adam, maybe you and I can connect offline and we can figure out what a process that works to both accommodate that, but also not take up too much time. So I appreciate you flagging that. Okay, so here's that same schedule in calendar format. So if you guys have your calendars pulled up, your Google calendars, please put these dates in there so you know what's happening. We're going to talk through it again because I think some people are visual learners this way. And I tried to color code these. So green things, anything in the light green is the electric ready code language. Anything in blue is the EV ready and solar ready code language. And then the red is public comment, the black is our final vote. So today we're discussing electric readiness, but we will send you the EV and solar ready draft codes. You guys have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to review the EV and solar ready codes. Then, and we see March 9th meeting is here. Then Friday, we will send all of the proposals we received back to the board, and you guys will have Saturday, Sunday, Monday to review those. And then Monday we're voting on those. And this will be the preliminary vote. Then Wednesday the 8th, you'll be given the electric ready draft code package. You'll have a week to review it and provide us your comments. And then we will send the proposals to the board on the Thursday, and you'll have Friday, Saturday, Sunday to review them. We'll vote on Monday. We will then have a day to clean up the code package and get it ready for the public, which will be sent out on the 22nd. And then our public comment meeting will be on the 28th. We will have one day to clean up the code package, get it to you guys on the 30th so that we can vote on the 31st. It's going to be a busy month. You guys are going to be hearing a lot from us. So I just want to make sure that everybody is prepared, oriented around this schedule, that we don't hear on the 17th or, on the meeting on the 20th that I didn't have time to review the code proposals. This is the schedule. So please, please, please plan on spending time during these places where the board is going to review the proposals or send us your feedback, that you have time allocated for this. Because like I said, if you miss a deadline, there's nothing we can do to accommodate for that, because we are on such a tight time schedule. Okay, drawing a hard line here. It's hard for me. So this is how the code review process is going to look for the board. Step one, we will send you the code proposal and we will send you a survey. So your duty as a board member is going to be to review the full draft code. think to yourself, what changes do I want to make, or do I like it as written? And then within the survey, and I'll show you some screenshots of the survey so you know what it's going to look like. If you want to change code language, you'll have an opportunity in the survey to suggest the changes to the code language that you would like to make. Now, we do not have time to have comments submitted that are not specific code language proposals. If you are going to suggest a change, it needs to be a sort of redlined version of the code section that you want changed. We want all of the specific language and what specific words or sections you want changed. We do not want to receive comments that say, I don't like this, I don't want this word there, without a recommendation on what the change should be. Okay, we don't have time to interpret that from you guys. We need the exact specific language of the change you want. And that will be helpful because when we receive all the code proposals, we can send those back out to you guys, and then you all can understand what your fellow board members are suggesting. So that will be step one, completing the survey with the very specific changes that you want to make, or you can complete the survey and say, I don't want to make any changes, and that's great too. Step two is going to be our straw poll vote. And we're calling it a straw poll because we want to differentiate these first votes that we're going to have from our final vote. Okay, so the straw poll voting is going to happen during meetings 10 and 11. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull up every suggested change from the board members. So we'll show the original section, then we'll go one by one through each suggested proposal, and we will host a vote on whether or not the board wants to accept that change. For the straw poll voting, we will be going by a 50% majority. And I will also say within these meetings, we're going to be voting section by section, proposal by proposal. So there's going to be a lot for us to get through in 3 hours. And it's going to be really, really, really important that you guys have had a chance and taken the time to review every proposal that's been sent and submitted by the board and put some preemptive thought to which ones do I like and which ones don't I like. Because there won't be time. We're planning to have whatever board member submitted the proposal give about a 30-second pitch on why and what the change is. And then there'll be up to a minute for clarifying questions, which is not a lot of time. And we don't want to cut the board off from like understanding a proposal if it is confusing in nature. So we will be flexible in that, but we also want to make sure the board has a chance to vote on all of this, because if you guys run out of time, then it goes to the executive committee. So we're trying to play that balance. Adam.
I just wanted to note too that with code submission changes, and I know you're going to talk about this in a minute, but just in case people are like freaking out, like a minute's not a lot of time to understand something, just note that when board members submit changes, you will also be asked to submit essentially a reasoned statement to try to explain that change. So that will also be included in what gets sent to you ahead of time. So it's not like you have to figure it out and read through it and understand it in 60 seconds. So just in case anyone was concerned about that.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, for bringing that up. That was something I definitely missed. So we'll conduct the straw polls. Simple majority will win. And for every proposal or amendment change that's proposed that's voted yes, our team will then incorporate that into the final code package. Anything that's voted no will not make it. And into the final code package that we vote on as a board. So if you want something in there, you better write a compelling case for it. So this is what the survey is going to look like. You will be, and again, remember, you'll have the draft code language package, the full package in a PDF for you to reference. The survey is going to take you through the code language section by section. So you'll review the full package of code language. You'll flag what you want to change. You'll go to the survey. And then for each section of the code, you'll have a chance to say, here's the code section. Do you want to make changes? Yes or no? If you click no, it will move you on to the next section. If you click yes, you'll get a chance to propose the code language. Now, I want to emphasize that, say you're going through and you click no, I don't want to make a change, and you go to the next one And then you say to yourself, shoot, you know, I actually really do want to make a change to that. You can use these buttons down here to navigate to and from any of the questions and go back to change your answer. If you fill out things later in the survey and go back to change your answer for one of the first questions, it's not gonna mess with your responses in the remainder of the survey. So the board should have the flexibility to use the previous and next buttons. And if for some reason you're having technical issues with that, you can always reach out to us at any time. So let's say in this example, we want to make a change to this section of the Solar Ready code. So we'd click yes, we'd hit next. And then you will be sent to a page that looks like this. So the first box is going to be where you detail the exact code language change that you would like to make. And it would be the most helpful for our team if you copied and pasted this whole thing into this box and then made the changes within it. So it's not just one sentence that you're changing here or there. Then you'll have this second box to give your why statement. Why do you want to make the change? Why are you changing it? What, give us a little bit of background so that your fellow board members can understand. Once you're finished with those, you click next and it will take you on to the next section. So this is what the survey will look like. Okay, so to go into a little bit more detail about the straw polling process. So I mentioned this already, but we're going to go through and present each proposed amendment one by one. All amendments that we send to the board or that we present during this meeting will be redlined, meaning we will take the original language and we'll use like strike through text formatting and like red text formatting so that the board can see exactly how the original was changed, or the new amendment was changed from the original. And then the board member who gave that proposal will have that 30 seconds to make their pitch. We'll have the 60 seconds for questions or rebuttals. And then we will do hands up straw poll voting. So that'll be what we did at our last meeting, where we'll ask people to raise their hand or lower their hand, and a 50% majority will win. And I just want to remind the board that in this preliminary vote, we're going to use a 50% majority to keep things simple. At our final meeting 13, every item that we vote on is going to need a 2/3 vote consensus in order to make it into the code package. So just note that those thresholds will change between our preliminary votes and our final votes. Rules and expectations. Yeah, Kevin.
A quick question on that. So if they don't receive 2/3 vote, the code's not allowed to go without that section. Does that become a decision of the executive board at that time?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so rules and expectations. Please, please, please review all materials ahead of time. Block out time on your calendar to make sure that you get it done. It might involve some weekend work, so thank you all for your time and energy and volunteerism to be here. It will be a bit of a lift for us to get through these next few weeks. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick follow-up question on Kevin just asked. So if it would be amendment by amendment that's getting the straw poll, and then eventually at that last meeting, it gets each one gets voted again to get the to get to the 2/3. And then if a particular amendment or 2 or 3 or 10, whatever that might be, would then go to the executive committee to once again have to hit the 2/3 threshold for that particular amendment. So it's amendment by amendment, not the package. Is that right?
Yeah, Adam, do you want to speak to that? Thanks.
Sure. So I think, Tim, so I guess there's a little bit confusion between amendments and code elements. So the amendments are what the board will be considering during this straw polling effort. So Kim, if you want to go back up to the slide where it shows the survey. Just really quick. So right here. So the CB 103.3, for example, that's going to be considered a code element. The amendments are changes you guys are going to be making to those. Those will all be resolved prior to the meeting 13. So the final votes in meeting 13 are not going to have any amendments. It's just you're going to be seeing each one of these sections potentially as amended, but based on what happened in those straw poll meetings. So it may not look exactly as it did when Kim sent it out as a draft. Like if you all decide you want to accept changes from your fellow board members, but that will be a finalized code element, and that's what you'll be voting on in the final meeting with the 2/3 vote required. And then the executive committee, any of those that are like do not pass, the executive committee will then deal with those code elements. Does that make sense? So they're not like the executive committee is not going to go back and revisit all of the amendments that we talked about in meetings 10 and 11. They're going to be considering the elements that were either adopted or were not adopted by the board.
Okay, yeah. So let's say I proposed an amendment to this one that's up on the screen, and it gets 50%. But there are 3 or 4 other amendments that do also that get the 50%. Then Lotus and I guess Adam would be responsible for melding those together to come up with the code element language, which is ultimately what the group will be voting on in that meeting 13. Is that the process?
Yes, that's correct.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, because that brings up another point that I missed. If, let's say, Tim and Kevin, you guys propose a code language change to the same 3 words in this section, as an example. If there are more than one code proposal on the same exact little piece of these sections, we will we'll do the straw polling a bit different. So we'll show the original, we'll show proposed change 1 and proposed change 2. We'll do, and then we'll sort of do a vote to say, which one do you guys like? The top 2 of those 3 options. Well, then we'd host a second vote of the top 2. So we'd say, here are your 3 options, pick your top 2 board. And then from there, we'd pick the top one. So in the case that happens, that's our plan.
And for those who are familiar with ranked choice voting, we're essentially doing a ranked choice voting structure.
I was like, I knew there's a technical word for it. Okay. So again, cannot emphasize this enough. Please do your homework and please do it on time. And the other rule expectation is that when you propose an amendment, it's we really, we would like the board to focus on substantive language changes only. We really want to focus our time and energy in those voting straw polling meetings to prioritize language changes that are going to change the outcome of how the code is interpreted, right? If you're wordsmithing the word "the" and the word "a," that's great. We'll catch that. We'll incorporate those things, but really try to, think through what you're recommending and is it a substantive change? Well, I can't say that word today. Please also review the explanatory notes for how the board feedback was incorporated when you read the draft code language. If you're wondering why certain elements have been included or not included, we tried to include an explanatory note for every single one of those. So please make sure you're checking that. And again, if you're going through the survey and you get here to this page, I want to make a change, and you use number 3 and you just provide us a comment and you don't provide us a code language proposal, we're not gonna look at it, right? So this box is for code language proposals. Down here, you can throw your comments. So just really please try to keep that in mind as you go through. Okay. Final reminders, amendment straw polling versus the final vote. The straw poll is going to be a 50% vote where majority wins. And then our final votes are going to be cast using a system called Mentimeter, which will anonymize the votes and allow us to easily gauge the 2/3 consensus as we do that final vote. Tim.
Thanks. Sorry for all the questions. So the meeting 12 is the meeting we added to allow public comment. And what does that look like if, say, some of the comments that come to the board result in potential, wow, the light bulb goes off. Maybe that's a good idea. And nobody ever thought about that, or we think collectively that's really a good idea for some amended language. Is there a process then between that meeting and then the final version that goes into 13 that we're voting on all the code elements?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. That's a really good question. And Adam, please add to whatever I'm just going to say. So after the first half of that meeting, we'll be done hearing public comment. In the second half of that meeting 12, we will expect that the board will bring forward the comments that they heard that they want to propose a code change to. And we'll kind of have it as we did in our early meetings where, like, say, Tim, you say, I like what Scott said, I think we should change it. We'll let the board discuss a bit. And then Adam and I haven't quite I don't think we've talked about this yet, Adam, if we're going to do straw polling in the second half of that meeting to decide what changes we actually incorporate or not. But I would anticipate that would be our plan. We'd allow for discussion. We'd host a straw poll. We'd say 50% of folks agree. We will then incorporate it into the final code package the next day, and then we'll get you guys all of the final language so you can review it before the final vote.
Yeah, I would just add a couple things. I think one is that was part of the purpose of the written public comments ahead of time, was to help us incorporate changes before a late public comment meeting, so that we will hopefully come with a package that generally reflects the board's feelings about the comments we've received thus far. And then that second, the downside of having the second half of that meeting be the discussion about the public comments is that it won't be like these previous meetings where you'll have had time to look through and think through the changes that people are suggesting. It'll kind of be unfortunately, just because of the timeline we're on, a bit of an on-the-fly decision. But the hope is that there won't be many changes needed because of the previous opportunities for public comment that we've had thus far.
Thanks, Adam. Carolyn?
A comment and a question. So first, I would hope that we would all do our duty to the board and strive to reach a 2/3 or better consensus. So from a process standpoint, thinking about creating space if there are resolvable issues so that we aren't just kicking our responsibility to the executive committee to make decisions for us, because I think we're charged with reaching a consensus view. Along those lines, just a clarification, I think I heard you say, Kim, that the final vote would be anonymous, and that surprised me a little bit. And so I was wondering if you could clarify that process and where that fits within. I guess it just surprises me. I think we should stand by our vote, and so I'm always a little bit concerned. David probably is gonna. I was gonna ask.
David's got his hand up. I'll give it to him.
Good question. I actually had the same response. I think the final vote needs to be on the record in a public meeting. It shouldn't be anonymous.
Okay. Thank you, David. Thank you, Carolyn. We will then figure out how to accomplish that. I think the software we were proposing to use just anonymizes it. So what we can do is think through what different voting options there are that are quick that can sync up and that can provide everybody.
Can we just have live votes where we say provision 1.3 vote? Those. Just do it live.
Yeah, I think we're gonna know what our total because the 2/3 vote is 2/3 of the board members, not of the members present. So we know exactly how many votes we need on every code element is 14. Right. So you just count the hands. If you have 14 hands, then you got it. If you don't, then you didn't. So I think, and we'll keep track of who voted what. I think that makes sense.
Okay, great. Well, we can talk about this offline. Just make sure we've got that process dialed so that we're able to capture all of the names of the folks who voted for each one and not lose that if we do hand poll voting. Okay. Awesome. So I cannot emphasize enough. Please come prepared. Please do your homework. The next steps for you guys are going to be, we will send out by the end of the day today, the EV Ready code draft, the Solar Ready code draft, and the explanatory versions, along with the surveys. So please review those drafts and get us your comments by the end of day next Thursday. If that's not already a calendar invite in your calendars, make it one. Then again, as a reminder, we will be voting on all of the proposals on Monday, March 6th, and you'll get them on Friday, March 3rd. So please spend some time that Friday afternoon, weekend, or Monday morning looking at those so you are ready and prepared for the vote. And we'll keep reminding you guys of this process as we continue to go through. But that's my last process slide for now. Are there any other questions, comments, thoughts about what's coming? Yeah, Elizabeth.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep, new earbuds. Yeah, for schedules and things like that, I know March, spring breaks and whatnot. Do you need to know of any conflicts or anything like that ahead of time? I don't personally have a meeting conflict, but you're going to get my out of office reply a few times in there. And just what's your process for knowing that kind of stuff ahead of time?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And Adam, feel free to chime in here. I think it'd be helpful to know if a board member cannot make a meeting, so we know who to expect, or if you're going to be late to a meeting. Although the board did decide that if someone is not present, that they cannot vote. And so just keep that in mind. If you, as the board member, are not present during one of our voting meetings, you won't be able to post meeting cast your vote for different elements. I don't necessarily, I think, need to know when you guys are in and out of office. Just know, I think from my perspective, I will be sending all of these materials out to you guys. So if you are out of office and it does fall within one of those windows where we need your review to you as a board member have the choice to, if you want to review it or not, provide feedback or not, but we would love everybody's feedback. So I would emphasize that even if you are out of office, to please try and carve out a couple hours for that review, but you don't need to share your schedules with me. If I get an out of office, that'll be just what it is. Thanks for flagging that. Adam, any other thoughts?
I would just add a couple things. Is that one, I think we would all agree that it's somewhat unfortunate that we're on such a tight timeline, but this is a statutory timeline that we're working on, so we just have to do what we have to do. I think the other comment I would make just is that, as Kim alluded to earlier, it's a use it or lose it opportunity to comment. So as she said just now, you have an opportunity if you want to provide changes, if you want to provide, proposals, that you manage how you want to do that within the timeline that Kim has set down, just because of the statutory deadlines we're working under.
Thanks, Adam. And then Kevin posted a question in the chat. How long is the forum open for written public comment? Adam, can you speak to that?
Sure. So I was in the middle of typing a response, but I will just go ahead and say it. So essentially the written comments have been available, like as you guys have seen, have been open since I think I posted the form on November. So folks have been able to comment thus far on the discussions that have been had and provide any suggestions that they want to make. I recognize that, nobody has seen exact code language yet. Kim's timeline is going to give the public that 5 to 6, 5 business days, around 6 to 7 days of total to look at the actual final proposed code language, in which case folks will be able to either make comments live during that public comment session, or they will be welcome to submit written comments via our existing comment format to that written code language. So those will be open, the written comments are continuously open and will be continuing to be open during the time where that code language is public for folks to view.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Adam. All right, any other thoughts, questions, comments on this process? All righty, thanks everyone for your understanding and in advance for your review and your engagement. I'll also just note for those, I know there's a couple board members who are coming late to today's meeting, so I will direct them to the first half of the recording for the instructions and the timeline and process. So So those who aren't here, make sure that they are just as well aware as you guys are about our upcoming schedule. Alrighty, and with that, we are going to move into our electric ready discussion for residential. So I'm going to go through a quick reminder, just get everybody's brains dialed back into electric readiness. So for the statute requirements, we need to provide adequate panel capacity, adequate dedicated electric panel space, electric wire, electric receptacles, physical space for future installation of high efficiency electric equipment, including heating, water heating, cooking, drying, and EVs. Okay. And the decisions that we need to make as a board, the two required by statute are the specifics around the electrical circuit, panel sizing, and then the location and adjacency specifics of that receptacle. And then there are a couple of additional items that the board was able to discuss and consider a bit last time, and we'll dive back into today, which include requirements around a condensate drain, labeling, any exceptions the board wants to make, and then a consideration of how some communities have broke out water heating as separate from the remainder of their equipment types for electrification. We can look at what that code language is. So there were a couple themes that we pulled out from the last meeting, from the general discussion that we had at the end. The first is that we heard pretty strongly from the board that you guys are interested in keeping the language as broad as possible to allow for flexibility. And I think you guys said you actually, maybe not as broad as possible, you kind of landed in that middle zone. We showed the like super broad, the medium broad, and the very specific. And the board kind of fell right in the middle there. The elements that we heard generally were supported are requiring a 2-pole circuit breaker for each electric appliance within the panel. There was some discussion and consensus around an outdoor receptacle or junction box for the condensing unit, if not already there, for the AC, and then a condensate pipe for the internal condenser. That seemed like a pretty important factor from the board's perspective as well. So I'm going to go through again a couple of sort of overview slides, and then we'll open it up for board discussion. So again, as far as specifics, the board kind of fell right in the middle of, we don't want to get too specific by saying the volt or the amperage, but we might want to get specific enough that says you need a 2-pole circuit breaker for each electric appliance. And I think the board generally felt like the super open requirements would be perhaps too flexible in that, and that we know, at least for example, that you need a 2-pole circuit breaker for any of these appliances to be installed later. So kind of right in the middle is where we heard that feedback from the board. So I guess I'll pause. I'll pause here. I have 3 examples of how of the electric ready code language for residential for you guys to consider. But first, are there any thoughts or questions, or does anyone want to clarify or contradict anything that I just shared about what we covered in the last meeting and where the board consensus fell? Carolyn.
No, I think I agree with that. I think we really didn't get to the locational aspects in our discussion, so I just wanted to name that. That definitely reflects, I think, where we were at, but we hadn't. I think there's opportunity to think about location of proximity to where the appliances must go that we haven't really gotten to. Just wanted to clarify that.
Yep, thanks, Carolyn. And we'll have a couple of slides on that and following the electrical capacity pieces. Any other thoughts that sound about right to everybody where we landed last meeting? Okay, so I'm going to show example code language from Denver, from Crested Butte, and from Superior. And all of these start to get at, I think, the board's direction, but they also have, in some ways might be more general or more specific than we're looking for. So I share these as example formats for how the board could consider how we put this code language package together. So here's Denver's language, and they are the ones that have that requirement for a 2-pole circuit breaker. However, I just wanted to note that Denver only requires that for water heaters, and for no other appliances. That section right here, the junction box, raceway, bus bar, electric panel, conductors serving the electric panel shall be sized to accommodate electric water heating equipment sized to serve the same load as a fossil fuel appliance or equipment. So just to note that that's how Denver has set it up. This type of language could be used, and just we could take out that specifics, the specific acknowledgement to the electric water heater. Crested Butte has it set up a little differently, where they say any building must meet the following construction requirements, and then they have subcategories for each one of the appliances that would use gas. And so within this example, you know, we pulled this because it's simple, it's easy to follow, and it has the opportunity to add those specifics around a 2-pole breaker or a it actually already has the condensate drainage language in it. We could add fireplaces if the board so chose, and add the receptacle piece per the state statute. So this is just another example of how this code language was set up. And then for Superior, they basically said any combustion equipment needs to meet this requirement, where this is sort of that more open opportunity. But if we like the approach where it's just sort of all bucketed as one, any fossil fuel appliance must meet this requirement, we could keep it more like Superior's and include those specifics around the 2-pole circuit breaker, condensate pipe, outdoor outlet, etc. So those are the 3 examples we pulled, just to show you guys how this could be set up, how different communities have approached it. Again, there's really not a consistent approach that we've seen across all of these. They all have consistent elements, but not necessarily a consistent approach. So with that, I want to stop here and would like to open it up for the board to discuss and share their thoughts on, do we like one of these in its structure? And then to get down to the nitty gritty of what are the specifics we do want to outline within our more general requirements. And Tim, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you. So this kind of goes along with my comment a little bit earlier in the meeting about the PV ready and the conduit being installed. But it seems to me that the intent of this legislation was to make it the least cost to retrofit in the future. And so with that, at least in my mind, just providing the space in the panel board and maybe a space for a 2-pole breaker, you would still have to get an electrician in. And I know electricians are really good at fishing wires and pulling wires throughout a house. You know, that's what they do on retrofits all the time. But that's a fairly expensive proposition. I know it's been expensive in some of the old houses I bought. So my suggestion would be that not only do you have the space in a panel board, but you provide similar, like for EV, you're going to provide the wiring and maybe just the junction box to a particular location.
Thanks, Tim. And I just want to remind the board one more time of the statute definition for electric ready, which does include panel capacity, panel space, electric wire, electric receptacles, and physical space. Carolyn, scoot back to that slide. Here we go.
Yeah, and I am going to echo what Tim said. I think it's important to get the wiring to the outlet. I think in most cases it's fairly predictable. I do think we have to envision a couple of scenarios within that context, though, of what that looks like in terms of like a home with a boiler system, or you're going to do like more of a mini split and what that really means. But I think we just need to plan for some flexibility there. But it can't stop at the panel capacity. We just had to go fishing wires through my house to get my stove in, and I can very much attest to what Tim said. It's not an easy proposition.
Thanks, Carolyn. Elizabeth.
Yeah, I'll echo what everyone else has just said. And then I would only add consideration here for the HVAC side of things, that there might be 2 different locations of equipment. So you'll have an air handler as well as your condensing unit. And if we want to put in a little language about any capacity for where the air handler is, as well as where a condensing unit might live.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, Adam?
I just have a question for Elizabeth on that. So I'm wondering, since most homes with central heat and air conditioning would have an air handler probably already, right? So do we need to specify that, or because that would likely already be any house that's going to have a central heat or central air conditioning? I'm just wondering if that needs to be specified or if that would kind of be covered already, given that
Yeah,
those would already be
so
there.
like, for example, there are going to be a lot more heat pump options that may not have the full capacity at the cold climate. And do we want to allow for an electric backup where the air handler is? Because that would be a coil at the air handler. So, you know, that might be, I don't know, like a 2 kilowatt, 3 kilowatt type of backup application. And so that would require probably more capacity than is already there for just the fan and the blower and stuff.
Got it. Okay, that cleared it up. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Adam, and thanks, Elizabeth. I can just speak personally. That is a physical space constraint in my home. I did look at a heat pump replacement, and it needed more ceiling space to accommodate the electric backup plus the new air handler. Okay, so I'm hearing general consensus, I think, around we need the panel board space, we need the capacity, the wiring, and the junction box. My question then is, I'll go back to superiors. You know, the board has stated we want to keep it generalized, right? And so there is language here that says, where is it? So we can write this language a couple of ways, right? We could go that basalt route where they said, and I think the board said, we don't want this. Here's the volt and the amperage we need for each wire, and it needs to be this big and all of that stuff. Or we could do, you know, something that says appropriately phased circuit shall have a minimum amperage requirement for comparable electric appliance, equipment, or end use. So within the bounds of how we want to state to the builder, this is how you figure out the wire, the panel capacity, the panel size. Where do you guys think that language should fall? And I'm happy to flip between sides, but Carolyn, go to you first.
Yeah, I still land on the allowing some flexibility, again, recognizing that each home might be installed with a portion of what's needed already, depending on what its configuration is. And so not being so prescriptive as we catch ourselves up, but I think we can provide some minimum provisions along the lines of what Adam and Elizabeth were just discussing, where we're closing loopholes on interpretation around what an appliance actually represents.
Thanks, Carolyn. Okay, Tim?
I like this language pretty much as is, but I'm not sure, maybe we add in like something specific about the circuit breaker being the 2-pole, you know, to accommodate what will probably be needed, at least at the panel board.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Any other thoughts from folks? Yeah, Andrew.
I generally concur that this provides some direction and still has some simplicity, that it isn't overly prescriptive. I at least wanted to raise a comment of the ready access and no obstruction, and I don't know if anybody could actually ensure that, or is it ready access with no obstruction with the removal of the one appliance, and then it's accessible with no obstruction to install the new appliance. It may not be readily accessible with no obstructions when it's coexisting, if it is to coexist.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. That's a good flag. I would interpret this, but you know, I would look to the board's interpretation as well, that the old system would have to be removed in order for the electric system to be put in place. And so if that is the obstruction, we could move forward in good faith, knowing that that would be removed. And if that's the only obstruction, it would be okay. If there were other things blocking the way from an electrician accessing that conduit or the circuit, then we might, other than the old appliance, then that would, I think, violate that ready access piece. Tim, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, my opinion of that language, at first I read that and I totally understood it. And then when I reread it from Andrew's comment, it didn't make sense, but now it makes sense. I'm doing a 360 on this one. This isn't referring to an electrical code requirement, in my opinion, to be readily accessible. I think this is catching, let's say if you had the 6-foot rule and they put it next, like adjacent to, say, for a gas-fired laundry, and they put it at the back of the laundry sink cabinet. I think that's pretty much where they were going, to try to make sure that, or in a kitchen, you have a cabinet in the back and you got drawer cabinet next to where the range is, and it meets the 6-foot rule, but it clearly is not accessible. So I think my idea is that's what that is trying to capture, which I think is actually good language to have in.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, so I'm hearing that we kind of like the approach of Superior, but that we have an opportunity to add some more specifics. So in the specifics that I've heard are a 2-pole circuit breaker minimum, or space for that. Physical space for the air handler unit, and as well as the appliance. And then we'll also have a chance to talk about this later, but one thing that was brought up last meeting as far as specifics is also a condensate drain for the condenser. Carolyn?
Yes, I think there's 2 more. There's the one we previously identified, which is the one of the location of an outdoor circuit, and then the addition of a circuit for electric backup with the air handler.
Okay, thank you for bringing those 2 up. Does anybody on the board? Oh yeah, Kevin, go to you first.
Sorry, just quick clarification on the 2-pole breaker, because I think most of these appliances that would, a newer heavy duty electric appliance, and maybe it's a question for the electricians on the board, like, don't most of those require 2-pole? So if we just say 1, but we're anticipating that it's going to be range, air handler, etc., should it be per instance? I mean, that throws a lot of extra panel space. Was that the intent behind that? Was like for everything that could be replaced, there's a 2-pole available?
It should be per appliance being replaced, not a single.
That was my understanding as well.
But I think it's a good point to be specific.
Thanks.
We add that language and not to. It's per combustion appliance. There has to be.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that clarification.
And there's plenty of room in the panel. It's not a big deal. I've been adding them left and right in mine. I still got tons of room.
Can you loan me some while you're at it? Mine's totally full.
Mine's full too.
That's why you get a newer home, and they're built with a 200 amp service, and then the panel has to have plenty of room. That's what code does. It's great.
All right, great. So does anybody, I'll go through that list again, and I'll go through it slowly. And if anyone, maybe Claire, if you've been typing all of this and you want to throw it in the chat for our visual learners out there, that could be helpful too. So 2-pole circuit breaker per appliance, physical space for the air handler unit as well as the appliance itself, a condensate drain, outdoor circuit for the outdoor condenser unit, and a circuit for the electric backup for the air handler unit. Elizabeth?
Yeah, something else just occurred to me with regard to the exterior condenser. We could have situations or people could build homes that don't have cooling. So there may also need to be physical space for that condenser rather than just swapping out a cooling only condenser. It's rare, but you know, it could happen.
Okay, and that means physical outdoor space outside.
Yeah, physical space.
And not on a bedroom wall if they can help it. Although that's probably
Right.
too specific.
Yeah. Okay. Tim?
Yeah, comment about starting to get into locations. We have seen, I've got a new subdivision, and there are some now restrictions for where the builders and homeowners can put like condensers. I think the point was not by bedroom windows, or we get complaints quite often because the higher density single family homes that the developers are doing, where they're 6 feet apart, and you know they take fire rating, et cetera, to take care of that, and they are putting that, you know, the condenser on the outside or the air handler or whatever it might be, a heat pump. I don't know how loud those things are, but so I think we need to be cautious about getting specific about that. And it's just, I like the general is you provide it somewhere on the outside, and then of course, if it's not in the right spot, you can't get into that type of detail.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So specifying that there should be physical space outdoors for it, but not getting any more prescriptive than that. Okay, fantastic. Are there any other specifics that the board feels passionate about, empowered to share that you guys want to make sure you're seeing in this code language? Yeah, Carolyn.
One thing I noticed in the Denver one that you have up here is the clarification about what constitutes water heating. And I don't know if there's value in that, you know, thinking about Insta-Hots or other things that might be in a home, and that we're not touching those. I don't know that any of those are gas appliances, so this is more just a question that I noticed they were very specific here, and just trying to think through that if there was anything we're missing.
Yeah, Carolyn, that's a good question, and I might put that question on pause till we get to the slides that are about the water heating, because a couple of communities broke out water heating separately, so we can see some examples of how they dealt with that. All right. So stop me if you're not ready to move on. I think the next thing that we want to discuss as a board is this adjacency piece. And so, you know, we see throughout the existing electric ready code language, everything from 1 foot to 3 feet to 6 feet. And those seem to be the three sort of measurements of adjacency. And so pose the question to the board, do you guys have a strong feelings one way or the other on how far away that electric wire and outlet is from the space where the appliance should be put? Kristen.
I think for health and safety, there's a perhaps some of the code officials on this call could weigh in. But my main concern would not necessarily be where those electric appliances are placed, but where the air intake is. The 21 code requires buildings to be pretty tight. We're going to be seeing a lot more heat or energy recovery ventilation systems. And if those air intakes are right next to a home's or neighbor's home's exhaust or fossil fuel burning appliance, that is not going to create a healthy or safe situation. So just curious if that is already addressed, or if that's something we may wish to flag.
Thanks, Kristen. That's a great question, and I will pass it to our code officials to answer. Tim, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, that's a good point on that location. My suggestion would be the 3 foot rule. With the type of appliances that I've seen, that's going to be a good accommodation for the potential how long the appliance cord is. 6 feet is a typical length on like a light. I know that there's the 6 foot or the 12-foot rule on just basic electrical outlets for wiring, but that's based on just 6 foot length of power cords for a light. But you're not going to typically see, I have typically not seen 6 foot long appliance cords for like my refrigerator or my electric stove or my dryer or washer either. So I think 3 foot, I think that's the right number.
Thanks, Tim. And then did you have any thoughts or in response to Kristen's question on whether or not we need to be thinking about air intakes versus where exhaust is located, and if that's already addressed in code or if that's something we should be considering here?
No, I'm sorry. That's already addressed in the code. So to the mechanical code provisions on the in the IRC, it'll give you those restrictions or separation requirements.
Thanks.
Which are much less with the high efficiency equipment. You can be really close versus just the draft. So I don't think that would be an issue.
Thanks, Tim. And thanks for sharing your perspective on the adjacency requirements. Any other thoughts? Tim is pitching the 3 foot adjacency. Any others agree or disagree? I see Ron nodding. I see a support in the chat. Okay, seeing a couple in the chat. Does anybody disagree strongly? Andrew.
I prefer to go with the 6 foot to ensure that all the surrounding area that it can generally be provided. That's my preference with my understanding and appreciation of where many of these go. That 3 feet may be too hard of a threshold.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Cody?
Yeah, as with any arbitrary number, I think the bigger the better to provide more flexibility. I've built a house where you had to have 24 inches of separation between a sink and an outlet, or you had to have within that, and I needed 2 more inches. And I'm sure that 24 inches was somewhat arbitrary to begin with. And I was banging the table, wishing we had 2 more inches. So I think for that purpose, a little bit more flexibility within the code would be better, as long as it meets the health and safety requirements by other codes.
Thanks, Cody. So that would, I'm guessing, kind of push you towards the 6 foot.
Yes, correct.
Our arbitrary numbers that we're looking at. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Does anybody? Yeah, Tim.
I'm just don't know if that's going to work with the manufacturers who provide the power cord that gets hooked up when you get the appliance. I mean, if I could be, I could do some quick research, but but I'm just looking at the one I've got, 3 electric appliances that we talk about in here, at least for, kitchen and laundry, and none of that, they don't have 6 foot cords. I wish they did, because when I pull out my electric range, if it came out 6 feet, it'd be a lot easier to get my vacuum in there, and it doesn't pull out 6 feet. So I would just caution that. That's just my comment of, I appreciate flexibility, but if you allow 6 foot and then the appliance, you got to go, I don't even know if you can go buy a 6 foot power cord for, an electric oven. Just my comment.
Thanks, Tim. I'll go to Tom.
I like the 3 feet for appliances like dryers and ovens. But I'm thinking of a mechanical room where you might be replacing a gas-fired water heater with some kind of a heat pump setup, and you might want a little bit more than 3 feet. In a situation like that, I think that if it was in the room itself, that'd be plenty.
Thanks, Tom. So I'm hearing from Tom, maybe a split in the adjacency. So we'd have 3 feet for appliances, ovens, and then for those HVAC system components. maybe allow out the flexibility to 6 feet.
So Kim, I think he said an important point as well as within the same physical space. I think once you start I think the concern with going too far is it starts to allow for it to be somewhere that you might ultimately cut off from the appliance location. And so I think giving more space, but adding that provision might be worthwhile.
Okay. So you can have it 6 feet, but it has to be within the physical space that is reserved for said appliance. Okay. Okay. Any other thoughts on this adjacency piece? Adam?
I would just mostly be interested in hearing from the folks who all advocated for 3 feet, if that alternative would be acceptable to them. I just worry about, for figuring out drafting code language, only a couple people speaking up. So I'd be curious to hear more from the folks who advocated for 3 feet.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, Ron.
Yeah, I'm going to advocate for the 3 feet. I think that that's the right dimension. They don't make extension cords for many of these 220 equipment, and I do think that Tim's observations earlier about what kinds of cords come with this equipment, it still doesn't preclude somebody from moving it if they want to relocate the device to someplace else in that room. You have an outlet. That outlet can be converted to a junction box, and you can move things around without too much difficulty if you need to reorient the space to accommodate a new device. But I think 3 foot is the right dimension.
Thanks, Ron. Others that were advocating for 3 feet. Anyone else want to share their perspectives? Kristen.
I do think that 3 feet is right too, having had the experience of having to move cabinets because a outlet was just beyond 3 feet. I hope nobody else ever has to do that.
Thank you, Kristen. Okay, so I think what might be helpful here, so that Adam and I aren't just coming up with our own interpretation of how you guys are feeling, is if we do a quick straw poll on the 3 feet, and I think there might be 3 options here. And Allie, if you don't mind catching these and throwing them in the chat, that'd be fantastic. Yeah, Carolyn, and then Rob.
I'm wondering if it would make our advocates for the 6 feet more comfortable if we offered an allowance that can create for more space.
So suggesting something like
provided it's fully accessible to the appliance location, so I think Kristen's point was well taken. Like, you don't want to have to move something to get to it, but I also think that there's probably a place where there's some ambiguity about location, and we might get hung up in to Cody's point, and just trying to vision where those hangups might come, and at least providing that discretion. And then I'm sure our code officials can review it within that context if we just allow for that. So it's starting with 3 feet would be my proposal. So I would start with 3 feet, but acknowledge that there can be some condition as long as it's fully accessible from the appliance location without obstruction. Then allowing a different proposal to be considered within the code, just so we're not so prohibitive. So that would be what I would offer.
Thanks, Carolyn. I appreciate your approach towards consensus. We'll go Rob and then Cody.
Hey, sorry. Yeah, quick question. I don't know why I'm bright red. I think I got the wrong camera on. The question, just a point of clarification. Why is the language in the top cell there within 3 feet of future electric equipment and not within 3 feet of current combustion equipment?
am just guessing. and we can
that's a
look at the
that's a
language that
that's,
it's,
that's a I think that's a broad
clarified
question
somewhere
to
else.
my I think that's a broad question to my to my colleagues here on the board if they had a good answer for that. I'm not questioning it. I'm just curious why it's specified as electric, not as within combustion equipment space.
I think the answer is there's also provision around the space for the future appliance, and so it's supposed to be envisioned, but it's a good catch, Rob. I think we should provide that clarity, Kim.
Okay. Yes. And yes, I am agreeing with you, Carolyn. I'm guessing that it's specified elsewhere in their requirements that the future electric equipment must be in the same physical location as the combustion equipment. And we just pulled out these little statements to show the difference in adjacency, but we can triple check that for sure. Cody?
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe clarify my position a little bit. There are certain instances like in a cabinet cavity where you're going to be sliding a 30-inch range that if you were 2 feet away, you'd still be out of the cavity. So even 2 feet in some instances is going to be too far away. So maybe there's a better definition of something that's fully accessible to the future appliance. So within the cabinet appliance, whether it's gas or electric at the time, and in other more flexible spaces, maybe in a garage or a utility room up to 6 feet. So I think germane to the argument is what appliance and where. But in most instances, I think the more flexibility, the better.
Thanks, Cody. And just to follow up on that, would you want to offer up which appliances would qualify? You know, we would want to be that shorter requirement, or, you know, speaking to those tight spaces versus the garage?
Off the top of my head, ranges, maybe gas dryers. That's the only thing I can think of that would really need to be fit in some form of pocket off the top of my head, but we can add more to that if we need to.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. Okay, so I think, Rob, unless you have another question, I think it was Tim next and then Adam.
Okay, thank you. I think the previous language that we had up and discussed about, I think there was a question I think that Andrew talked about, or somebody brought up, and we kicked it around a bit for ready access. I think that melded with the 3 foot rule. Yeah, there it is. Both wherever, have ready access with no obstructions. I think that takes care of that question of, is the box or the receptacle not in the cavity where the appliance is going to be. So I think with this language and putting the 3 foot rule together would take care of any potential issues, in my opinion.
Thanks, Tim. Adam?
Yeah, I would just echo what Tim said. I fully agree with that. And I think that regardless of the distance that we ultimately choose, it's still important to make sure that they have ready access with no obstructions, whether that's 1 foot, whether that's 6 feet. I think, you know, if you say within 6 feet and must be ready and have ready access and no obstructions, then if the only way to have it with ready access and no obstructions is to be right behind the stove, then that's where they'll put it. You know, I think that just seems to make sense to me.
And I agree with that. And I think you're kind of making the point that 6 feet would be a better option to have more flexibility, given that they have to have it within range and accessible. Am I wrong, Adam?
Yeah, Adam.
Well, I would say I would say I don't entirely disagree with that, but I think we also have to factor in the context of what Tim was talking about earlier with when it comes to manufacturer standards for extension cords, because yes, you could say technically it has ready access and it has no obstructions, but if the stove's extension cord can't reach it, what good does that do?
Yeah, and Tim, maybe you can help me out on which appliances come with extension cords, because most appliances I install, we supply our own extension cords, or they're hardwired from the junction box.
So I'll answer it with a question. How many of those appliances come with the 6 foot whips that come out of the box?
So, so in the appliances, I think are taken care of in the provision that they have to fit within the hole. So most of the times, a 3-foot whip or 4-foot whip seems most common would work. But I'm talking about appliances that would have more flexibility with the 6 feet. You know, so in a utility room or something like that, it's going to be hard. I can't think of an appliance like a heat utility or something like that. So that's not going to be hardwired from the wall that 6 feet couldn't do. Whereas, yes, a range is going to be bound by the pocket in the wall. So I know you guys are kind of focusing on that range whip, but I don't think that's going to be the issue here. Most of those are going to be contained within that pocket. So I'm looking for flexibility where more flexibility is needed.
Understood. I'm coming at it from an enforcement standpoint with my jurisdiction, and we put in the flexibility of 6 foot anywhere. I mean, I like the idea of maybe having it 2 different numbers, but I don't want to be turning somebody down because they or taking a complaint from somebody because the state energy code says it has to be within 6 feet and some electrician puts it at 6 feet. So my electrical inspectors have to accept that. And then they come in and get the appliances and they got to go buy some custom 6-foot whip, which I don't even know where you can buy it. You're not going to get it at Home Depot. That's just my point from an enforceability standpoint versus the flexibility question.
Thanks, Tim. And Ron, we'll go to you.
I was going to echo some of what Tim just said. I mean, when you go to the store and you try to buy the that whip, they don't sell it longer than 4 feet. So you know, I think that's the issue. Where maybe that electrician can find a way to install it with something longer. That's what's readily available in the marketplace. So I think we're going to end up having trouble if we do anything differently. And then, you know, the other piece of this, I think, is you know, that there is going to be a shift in the marketplace over time, and some of these heat pumps are actually going to start to become, I'm expecting them to become plug-in appliances to some extent. We've already seen some 110 powered water heaters that you can just plug into a regular outlet. I think that trend is going to continue, but we won't see 5 and 6 foot whips on those. We're going to see 3 foot. Or 4 foot. So I think we want to try to accommodate that by making sure that electric power is getting close enough that homeowners have a fighting chance of making that upgrade.
Thanks, Ron. Okay, and we have a suggestion from Carolyn in the chat. How about something like within the same cavity, not more than 3 feet of the appliance is replacing for non-HVAC and within the same mechanical space, not more than 6, excuse me, I didn't read that very well. Okay. Within the cavity, not more than 3 feet of the appliance it's replacing for non-HVAC systems. And then within the same mechanical space, not more than 6 feet for HVAC systems. So splitting those options, HVAC and non, to try to account for those wire sizes. We got Cody and Tom showing support. Ron, you want to share?
Yeah, I think that does kind of make some sense. I think we do see different trades when we're talking about HVAC equipment. We're typically talking about equipment that has refrigeration lines. And so there is a sense in which maybe that separation does make some logical sense.
Okay, thanks, Tim. So I might suggest, unless there are other comments, that we do a quick straw poll. And I'm thinking we can have option 1 be Carolyn's proposal. Option 2, we'll just keep it simple at 3 feet. Option 3, we'll keep it simple at 6 feet. If anyone would like to add a 4th option, speak now, forever hold your peace. Okay. So if that's all right with everybody, well, let's just do a quick straw poll to see where the group's, how the group's feeling about these different options. So again, and I think Allie, you're probably on it, already dropping these in the chat. Thank you. We'll wait till those get in there and then we can do a quick hand raise vote to see where we want to land. All right. So option 1, 3 feet for non-HVAC, 6 feet for HVAC. Option 2, 3 feet. Option 3, 6 feet. So option 1, voting, raise your hands. Now, please. And keep them up so I can get a count. 12, 13. Okay, 13 for option 1. Thank you, guys. You can put your hands down. Option 2, just the 3 feet. Please raise your hands. Okay, thank you, Ron. And then option 3, 6 feet. Please raise your hand if this is what you would like to see. Okay, thank you, Sean. So option 1 seems like the one that has the clear majority. We got 13 votes for that. So we'll work on developing code language around that. And just appreciate the board's discussion and suggestion from Carolyn. That is sort of a nice middle ground. Okay, so now that we've gotten through adjacency, I want to speak to a couple of the additional provisions. And we've already covered a couple of these. So I'm gonna skip through condensate drain because unless anybody wants to correct me, I believe I heard that this is an important component of the specifics that we want to make sure we add. Okay. The next piece to consider with the electric readiness is labeling. And there's a little bit of diversity in how folks approach the labeling piece within the panel. So this is labeling within the electric panel itself. Basalt has it specified future 240 use. Denver has it specified for future electric equipment. Louisville and Superior say that the unused end of the conduit and the panel should say for future electric equipment. And then Vail specified that the branch circuits and the electric panel should be appropriately labeled for their intended use. So if this 2-pole circuit breaker is for the stove, that's what it should be labeled as. Does the board have any thoughts or perspective on labeling? Do we even want to touch labeling? This, again, is not a required part of the code of the state statute that we must come up with. So this is also an option to just not touch this at all.
What does the electrician think?
I am not sure if Zach ever joined us today. Oh, Zach, there you are.
I just joined. Sorry, I am just leaving the doctors and I apologize. For me, I jumped in late. I just jumped on the Zoom, so I'm not positive, but I think I heard enough to you talking about labeling in the panel. I typically, and the work that I have done and do is in commercial and industrial, so everything is always labeled. In residential, I would love for it to be labeled. However, there's certain circuits that we know the 50 amp, there's usually 3 or 4 over than 20 amp and I can pretty much figure them out, but it'd be nice to have labeled, but not a big deal.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. That's really helpful. Kevin?
Yeah, I just advocate for the kind of Louisville approach or Denver, not saying this is for the stove or whatever, but it's not a big deal to label and it would be helpful down the line.
Thanks, Kevin. And I saw Aaron head nodding as well to that. Carolyn, and we'll go to Rob.
Yeah, I think it needs more than future. I think it needs to be labeled to the location of the junction box or the outlet.
So an approach like Louisville Superior where you're labeling both the panel and the other end of
yeah, it needs some indication of where it's wired to, because we're requiring it to be wired to either a junction box or outlet. And so there needs to be, if we're going to require labeling, then I think we should make sure it's as complete as we can get it.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. Rob?
Hey, I got the right camera this time. I'm inclined to speak towards having more specificity around the labeling, probably more towards the Vail end of the spectrum, especially if our provisions are going to include sufficient capacity, or at least for HVAC. If we're going to include sufficient capacity for resistance backup, I think that's we want to make sure that that circuit remains, that 60, 70, 50, 100 amp circuit remains dedicated to HVAC. Is available for HVAC in the future, because if a heat pump water heater gets put on that, that's going to eat up that circuit and need to be rewired at some point in the future too.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Rob. Elizabeth.
Yeah, I'm looking at the comments here. I also like the Vail version. The labeling here is not really for the electricians, because they're going to test it and make sure that it is what it is. It's for our homeowners. So the homeowner knows this is the circuit that is for your future electric range, for your future electric backup, whatever it is, because it's the homeowner that is going to take the initiative to actually make that installation happen. So to know that they've got the capacity there ahead of time, I think would be hugely helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. And I'll share Aaron's comment in the chat as well. I suggest both ends, panel and J-box, will also help homeowners down the road know that their home is pre-wired for these options. So agreeing with that. And there seems like some agreement for all of that. Okay. So does anybody want to speak out? So let's, I'm sort of hearing consensus for the junction box as well as the electric panel shall be labeled for future intended use, whatever that intended use, electric intended use is. Does anybody disagree with that? Think that that's too far reaching? Doesn't want to see that move forward? Tim.
Yeah, I would not be in support of putting a label on the junction box cover. I think you're going to get some pushback from the aesthetics folks who are buying these houses, and a lot of them I see actually paint the cover plates to match, or buy custom cover plates or whatever that might be. Certainly in the panel board, you can do that easily. There's enough room. Typically, some electricians handwrite the notes in. I mean, the electrical code already requires it to be labeled, for bedroom lights or whatever that might be. So this is just a little bit more to specify where that particular breaker, but not at the other end at the junction box cover.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Carolyn and then Ron.
Yeah, I also think it's less necessary to label the other end, because it'll be more obvious as long as you're specific enough on the panel, so that you would know where to look for that. Because most outlets that aren't already an electric appliance are not 240, 220, so they're going to be configured differently. So I don't have an issue with not labeling the junction box or outlet, as long as we're labeling good information on the panel.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Carolyn. Ron?
I was just going to point out that most of these junction boxes that we're talking about are not in places in the home that have high aesthetic value. We're typically talking about, mechanical rooms and basement areas that aren't particularly aesthetic. So I do think that, in other places of the house, that kind of labeling might be problematic, but I think where these locations are, it's probably less so.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. That's a good point. Zach, I saw you unmuted for a moment there. Did you want to add any thoughts to the labeling of the junction box itself?
I will agree. Most of in homes, they're not accessible. So, I mean, they're hard lit ceilings and things like that, unless you have a drop ceiling. So it's not accessible. But for a homeowner, I believe that it would be valuable to have it labeled if you can get to it on both ends. So.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Zach. Ron, did you raise your hand again, or is that from last time? Aaron, we'll go to you next.
Sorry. Yeah. And just to reiterate, that's why I brought up both ends, is not just for the installer and for the inspection, but more so for the homeowner's purposes, and to, raise awareness and help those folks know what's in their home.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. And Ron.
Sorry about that. I dropped my mouse. I think there also is something about putting that label in a place where the homeowner might see it that is a little bit of an advertisement, so that it does, sort of, most people don't spend time reading anything in their electric panel box, but if they have this sticker or sign or something on the junction box, they might notice it, and it does sort of raise awareness that that's a feature that their house has that they could take advantage of.
Thanks, Ron. See some agreement with that. And I'll just speak from a personal perspective. My home was built in the 80s, and in the case where we might be building these electric homes and it's not going to be it's going to be 40 years until someone swaps out for electric equipment, the knowledge is lost unless you've got some in-home labeling of what's behind those walls, right? Brad, we'll go to you.
Yeah, I'll kind of just echo that. What Ron said and Kimberly agreed to. We have very similar language in Fort Collins to what the Louisville and Superior, and that was the intent, to make that visible for the homeowner.
Okay, so I think it sounds like we've sort of worked through the concerns that might come from labeling the other end of the outlet receptacle itself. Carolyn?
Yeah, I just want to note that I'm not an advocate for the for future electric equipment language. I would prefer the labeling for its intended use. But I support everything. I can go either way with what everybody else has said. I think for future electric equipment is too vague, and you won't be able to make the connection between the panel and if you label it that way in home, that's fine. The panel box needs to be labeled more specific than that. It needs to be the intended use. For future oven, for future water heater, for future cooling system. So that's I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that is what I sort of heard from the group, that the Vail approach with the specifying the intended use would be the most helpful for the homeowner, from the homeowner's perspective. Okay, so I'm hearing both ends labeled with the intended use, ideally on both sides, but priority for the electric panel with the intended use. Any other thoughts on labeling? I think you guys are kind of all on the same page here. Yeah.
Sorry. Just one real quick comment. I think we need to decide whether it's both or one. I don't think as a code we should leave it open to ambiguity.
I see what you're saying. As far as should the intended use be labeled?
Should it be labeled on both? Right. I don't think it should. We should decide whether it needs to be labeled on both ends. We shouldn't leave it open to interpretation.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Ron or Rob. And I guess I've heard from the board that we want the labels on both ends, and that the label should specify the intended use. So does anybody not agree with labeling both ends with the intended use? All right, we're going to call that a consensus. Okay, thank you guys. Appreciate that discussion. So the next important piece of this code language is the exception. And really the exception that we see, or that we've seen in the code language across the state, is that if fossil fuel space heating equipment where a 280, 240 volt electric circuit exist for space cooling equipment, that suffices as the electric ready infrastructure for the future heat pump, is sort of what this is getting at. Any thoughts from the board on whether or not it's important to include this exception or language around this type of exception? Carolyn?
Yeah, I just go back to the discussion we had earlier about the electric backup and the space. So I think we kind of eliminated the opportunity for this exception by adding additional requirements with the air handler and the space.
that's a very good point. Any other thoughts on if others feel that this should be worked in even with the specifics that we've discussed earlier? Okay. I'm not hearing any advocates. So I think we can skip the exception. I guess actually I do want to make sure I ask this question before we move on. We could tailor this exception language to be specific to the electric branch circuit, panel capacity, and outlet for space heating, keeping in mind that the other physical space requirements, adequate electricity to the air handler, all of those things are in place. That's the way I could see working around that, but I don't, if we don't even want to go there, that's fine too. Carolyn?
Yeah, I would advocate for not going there and just being specific of what we mean by where the circuitry should be. Obviously, we aren't asking, I think we should be clear, we're not asking for additional circuits that are already covered within that. So for example, if we have like a mixed fuel cooking combination or something like that, but what they were thinking of, they were forgetting about the electric backup and the air handler sizing when they adopted this, and I think we had a deliberate discussion about that.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. And Kristen, I saw your hand go up and down a couple times. Did you want to add something?
Agree, don't go there.
Okay, easy enough. And I'm not hearing anybody advocate for this, so anyone? Okay, we'll continue on. So this is the water heater, the water heating section that I wanted to cover with you guys. So in a couple of the code languages we reviewed, there were specifics mapped out for water heaters, and I'll share in Fort Collins language, and Brad, you feel free to correct me if I'm not interpreting this correctly, but they had a breakout for every type of appliance. So they had a section for space heating, water heating, cooking, etc. So just know that. Erie, where we see the water heating specifics come into play, is where they specify minimum dimensions, and in a minimum volume for the exhaust from the space. Carolyn, you had asked a question on electric and water heating earlier, and I'm wondering if you could reshare that question. I'm not recalling what it was off the top of my head, but I want to make sure we touch on that now.
For what it's worth, I don't remember what my question was. I have a new question.
Yeah.
So when I was reading the Fort Collins ones, and since Brad's here, I was curious if we've considered tankless needs and solutions within this context, and if that came up when you were adopting these requirements.
Brad made a comment, he had to step away, so he might not be back.
Oh, that's true. I'm just now seeing that.
Or anybody else that's here and wants to share if that conversation has come up. I've just noticed it, particularly in multifamily, low density multifamily properties, a propensity for tankless in the design of the gas appliance. And so I was just curious if anybody's encountered that and where they landed in that thinking.
I'm not sure that anybody has, perhaps except for Brad. So Brad, when you're back, let us know. And Carolyn, your question is getting at, does that mean if someone goes tankless with natural gas, then we would need to, I mean, is it the physical space requirement for then the future tanked?
Yeah. Yeah, it's the physical tanks requirement, this physical space requirement.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the other thing I just want to name on the requirements, and I didn't get a chance to research this, so I apologize. You can yell at me, Kim, for not doing enough homework, but we certainly hear a lot about the need to vent the heat rejection from these units for successful customer experience. If they're within the finished spaces. And so just wondering if we've run across anybody who has incorporated any of that into their considerations around the spacing. I think it's in this Erie one. I just don't have any comparisons or knowledge of how effective it is, but it's certainly something that has come up from our retrofits primarily.
Yeah, Carolyn, I'm happy if nobody has an answer to follow up on that. I believe actually that came through, that language was developed by the code cohort for that Erie participated in, so I can check in with Shooms Coda, our technical advisor, who I think drafted that language, and kind of get the intent behind it. And you know, the same with the number 1, which gets at that space requirement.
And I remembered my original question, which was around the Denver provision for the BTU capacity to address any ancillary heating loads, water heating loads within the house that might be gas powered. And whether we need to specify what we mean by water heating equipment. So if you go back a slide or two. I think it was actually, yeah, that one.
And I'm sorry, Carolyn, could you restate your question?
So I was thinking about so that we always think of water heating in the home as the main water heating. But I do think that there's other water heating appliances that may be in a home that could potentially be gas powered, and I don't think that's our intent to address them. And so I'm just wondering if we need to be more specific. It's probably more a question for our code officials about whether we need to address that or not, but I'm thinking about whether you have additional heating. I don't know if it's like a steam shower or I think of Instahots, but they're primarily electric. I just don't know enough, but it occurs to me that those show up in homes.
Thanks, Carolyn. Elizabeth?
Yeah, Carolyn, I can answer that because I was on that committee and I had the same question. The code actually defines what is water heating equipment versus what is a boiler. And water heating equipment is specifically to service water heating, so potable water, whereas a boiler would be something that heats water that is not used to drink. So a boiler could be for space heating, it could be for a pool, anything that isn't potable water. That's a code defined term.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay. Any other thoughts on the water heating piece? Like I said, I'm happy to follow up with Erie and Shooms Coda on their experience with this and sort of the why behind these, and if they would advocate one way or the other that we include it, and I can bring that back to our next meeting. All righty. Well, with that, I think we are at the end of the residential electric ready specifics that we found in the different codes to speak with you guys about. So before we move on to diving into our small commercial and multifamily electric code, are there any final thoughts or comments from the board on the residential side of things? Okay, great. Well, I feel like we've got really good direction from you guys to at least get started on this code language. So thank you all for your feedback and input. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Allie to take us through small commercial multifamily.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, hopefully the language in this section looks pretty similar. So hopefully we can get through it in the 45 minutes that we have remaining. So moving on, just to review, these requirements apply to new construction for multifamily and small commercial mixed fuel use buildings under that 10,000 square foot minimum. So after that, we will talk about large commercial in a future meeting. But again, this refers to future installation of high efficiency electric equipment that includes specifically heating, water heating, cooking, drying, and then similar requirements as residential. It talks about panel capacity, that dedicated panel space, electrical wiring, receptacles, and the physical space that we talked a lot about today.
Really quick clarification. Is it all multifamily, but then only small commercial that's under 10,000 square feet? Just clarifying, the 10,000 square feet applies solely to the small commercial and not the multifamily?
It covers both.
It covers both. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. And so again, when we put this together, we thought sort of similarly that there was this range of specificity in the commercial language that we saw that kind of mapped very closely onto what was there for residential. And so you see that the SALT basically kept their language for this small commercial and multifamily as they did for the residential, and have all of those definitions for voltage, amperage, etc. Denver, again, basically kept the same sort of split between specificity on the circuit breaker, changing that to a 3-pole, but also sort of that building in that flexibility for accommodating the like size, similar load for future electric equipment. And then again, we saw sort of at the other end of the spectrum, just a very general code language from Fort Collins for pre-wiring. And then I guess just before we sort of dive into specific code language, does the board feel like we want to go in a similar direction, going sort of that general specific on the circuit breaker, but also, yeah, Tim.
Yeah, thank you. I've got some questions maybe to start the discussion off, particularly not on a small commercial, but on multifamily. So I've got a lot of apartments under construction in Broomfield, like over 3,000 units under construction right now, 12 different projects. And I think a third of them have gas-fired water heaters. And then they're just electric air handlers in each unit, or furnaces, one of the two. Some of them have the gas-fired furnaces too. So, and then each apartment unit has its own sub panel. Is a standard setup for what we have. So when we start this discussion, I'm not sure how these other communities, and maybe Brad's on from Fort Collins, on how that comes into play with sizing a sub panel. And then I don't have the answer. I just want to at least throw that out as part of where this might go in, with thinking of what we have with these individual apartments with sub panels. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Carolyn, did you have a response?
Yeah, and I was just going to add to Tim's comment, my question, which I remember from our solar conversation, we got specific about unit versus building requirements. And so I was just going to name that here as probably the thing that we most need to get clarity around.
And Carolyn, do you mean clarity as far as state statute and what it's asking of the board, or clarity from the board's perspective on how they want to pursue that?
The latter one. I think to Tim's point is, we need to admit there's a lot of different configurations within the multifamily space, whether they're, it's low density, that's typically individual services to each home with a panel, or is it sub paneled? And then what those requirements are. And then is our intent to treat this like even at the housing unit level or the building level. I think just being clear just reflecting on, I think Elizabeth raised this when we were talking about the solar requirements, is don't leave that piece up open to interpretation, and imagine the scenarios that could come into play as we make our decisions.
Yeah, Tim.
And I'm wondering if maybe that David could, from a legal standpoint, and possibly Adam, help us start with that clarity before we start going down a rabbit hole, so to speak.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
I'm happy to jump in, and then David, feel free
Go
to
ahead. Go first, Adam.
backfill me if you would like. Tim, I mean, my understanding of the statute is that it does not get that granular. So I think that there is some flexibility in determining how the board would like to pursue it. And David, please feel free to disagree with me.
No, that's my understanding too. Thanks.
Well, I think our grounding is still, at the end of the day, we want the future homeowners or home occupants to have the ability to cost effectively adopt electric if they want. So that should still be the grounding. It's just what creates that pathway, and where we need to be specific, I think, is the question.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. I saw Elizabeth and then Tim.
Yeah, I'm not sure I totally understood what the question was. And as far as metering, it's code required that a dwelling unit, even if it's in a small commercial, does have to be either separately metered, like on, like an individual utility meter, or sub-metered. So it can't be blended. A dwelling unit cannot be blended in with the rest of the commercial space and still meet code. So there will still be some separation there. Does that solve the problem or the confusion?
I think it's more of a question of the sub-metered, the sub-panel scenario, and the degree to which we need to be specific is ultimately the question. When it comes to where does the circuit breaker need to reside, providing that clarity that it has to be, I mean, I think the answer is if the appliance is located in that housing unit, the sub panel has to have the capacity for the addition. And so we would need to be more clear, I think, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think, and I'm not sure if this answers the question still, but that panel will be identical no matter how the dwelling unit is metered, because it does have to be isolated from the rest of the commercial space. And then whatever happens upstream could be different. It could be sub-metered off of a commercial meter, or it could still have an individual residential meter. But until we go upstream, everything else is still the same.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Tim, did you have something to add? Oh, you're muted. Tim, I think you're muted.
There we go. All right, sorry, hit the button twice. User error. So the typical multifamily project that we have, and I think the majority in the Front Range, they're rentals. So you've got a developer, they build it 95% of the time. Once they get it leased up a little bit, they sell it, make money. So individual renters are not the ones who are going to go, hey, I want to do my apartment and do electric appliances or change out to electric. So condos are very rare to see right now. I've actually got one project that Century Community is finally doing a condominium. I think there's quite a few more in the Denver area, but outside of that Denver, city of Denver area, ever since the construction defect issues came up 15 years ago, even with the new legislation that tried to help that, it's very rare to see a developer do condos. So I'm trying to understand then this legislation. I know it doesn't sound like it was very granular or specific, but talking about multifamily being electric ready is really geared towards the owner of the main building. And so that's where I'm trying to understand how that all comes into play with all of these individual apartments that nobody owns. I mean, the developer owns, and converting, I'm not getting my hands around how that intent was. And I don't know. And because if we start to require lots of things in these individual units, it's not probably ever be seen for the developer. I'm just not sure how that's working here.
Yeah, good question. Elizabeth and then Kevin.
Yeah, I can give at least one instance where that's going to come into play, and it's in Denver. So we have the Energized Denver Ordinance, which does require some electrification upon equipment replacement. So like if we've got a new building in Denver, there's a bunch of gas water heaters. When it is time to replace those, they will be required to go electric. Doesn't matter if they're in a multifamily unit or an office building or what have you, they do have to be replaced. So whether they're replaced by a condo owner, who owns that equipment, or they're replaced by the building owner who rents that unit, someone's going to have to do it. So we do still have to provide for that equipment and that opportunity. And I think there's going to be some additional jurisdictions that have to deal with that. As far as then who pays for the power for that, code says it's still, if the equipment is located in the dwelling unit, so must the power. So that still does have to go to the local panel. It could not go to a master meter. NEC doesn't allow that. So it still has to be located. So if we've got, a 300 unit multifamily, we need 300 different breakers to deal for 300 different water heaters. The exception there is if you have equipment that is outside of the unit, like a central water heater. And then that's the one that's over that 300,000 BTUs, and doesn't fall within some of those same standards. Did that answer the question?
Okay, I saw Kevin's hand up, so do you want?
Yeah, and I honestly just echoing what Elizabeth said. So we have a lot of that kind of multifamily project, both in Denver, but Boulder, Fort Collins, Longmont, all up and down. And we do see this, especially as people lean into the new code, Tim, they're absolutely planning for electric ready. So the instance that Elizabeth just mentioned where maybe the electric boiler isn't there for the building yet, we're putting probably infrastructure or circuitry up to that for future replacement. Because particularly for Denver, as soon as you're done with construction, it's an existing building, so it's subject to Energized Denver, as Elizabeth said. So we see it leading that way across many markets, not just Denver.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just curious what the effect of that is then in those communities, Kevin, or, in Denver and elsewhere that are going, already building in that electric ready with the size of the individuals, I call them sub panels, the panel boards for the individual apartments. And of course, they wouldn't need to do anything if they didn't have any gas fired equipment within the unit, or say a furnace, or that'd be the exception. But half of my projects do have one or the other, or one or both. So you just have to then go down this path, what we're talking about, getting ready to talk about today, or what we just talked about on the residential side, to be accommodating the panel board to be able to, and breakers and everything like that to the individual areas. So is that how that's being done?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. I mean,
yeah,
it's the Aquatherm, right? That we're all fighting, which is the brand name. It's a hydronic fan coil in the big apartments. And it's hard to beat cost wise, because that's the system where you're using a gas water heater to provide service water heating and space heating. So we're not prohibiting that per se, but if that is the design choice, we need to make sure electric infrastructure is provided. And maybe that electric infrastructure makes that Aquatherm no longer the most cost-effective choice. Kevin, I don't know what you're experiencing, but we're experiencing a giant shift away from that as soon as people do have to provide that infrastructure. And they say, well, if I'm going to provide that infrastructure, I might as well just go electric. And that's what's happening.
It's similar, or you'll say, we're still going to do an Aquatherm, but we're going to get that hot water source from a central boiler and know that that's going to convert to electronic later on,
which is much easier. Yeah.
There's very few. I mean, I think there's very few developers that will say, we don't have to do it now, so screw them later. It doesn't make sense. That's a detriment to the asset. for them to do that. So they recognize this is coming. And I think the degrees of knowledge and sophistication of what that implication is for the asset down the line is all over the map. But for the most part, people that are putting $100 million into a project have some people looking into this saying, no, you need to do this.
No, that's helpful background. That answers my questions, at least from your personal experiences, both of you, with what you've been seeing. And as I said, I will point out 90, I'm not going to use a percentage, a high percentage of developers who build these multifamily projects divest them sometimes halfway through the project, in my experience, and certainly really close. So they're looking at the upfront cost, but I know that's not part of this discussion, so I'm not making any suggesting any changes. But so as we go forward, I fully understand. I mean, this is going to be a state energy code. So, but thanks for that input. I appreciate it.
The point that Carolyn just put in the chat, thank you, Carolyn, is this the transformer space outside the building is a bigger question / problem. That is one area, especially in these really tight urban sites, where if we say, look, you have 2 transformers, when this building goes electric, you're going to need a third. And by the way, that takes away ground space that's open to the sky, and it just lost you a bunch of retail. That we do see resistance, and they say, that's somebody else's problem down the line. They can put a transformer in a vault, or maybe the transformers will get better, or maybe load sharing or metering or something gets better, so you don't need another full transformer. But that is the area where we should push back on, Tim. It's a good point.
And just to make sure I'm following, is that similar to our discussion around the EV capable light spaces, where if you put in all of this sort of panel capacity, when those get swapped out, you need the physical space for the transformer within the building, the new transformer?
Likely so, yeah.
And it's usually only a problem with our our tight sightline projects, urban projects, things like that. But that has to be considered.
Yeah. Okay. And then my comment was also to do with the outdoor condensing units. So if you picture a multifamily property that is constructed in, say, a climate zone 6, may not go in with planned cooling. So it may not have a central system either. And so we need to ensure that there's space for those outdoor condensing units for the electric option at a future date. So that physical space, like where they get located, has proved problematic in retrofits. And so.
Thanks, Carolyn. I'll go to Kim next.
Thanks. Yeah, I definitely agree with Carolyn's comments and the direction of this conversation. I'm not sure if what I have to add to it is how helpful it is for this conversation, but I just wanted to say that out here in my region, in mountain communities, we're facing affordable housing shortages. And so the multifamily construction that is happening, most of all the projects, they start considering heat pumps as the most efficient way to provide heating and cooling and air filtration for smoky days during summer fire months. And then that transition of, okay, we're going to install heat pumps has ended up making such that most of the projects end up being 100% electric, so that then they don't even have to bring a natural gas service to the building. So I just kind of wanted to emphasize that as the direction that these projects are going, kind of right off the bat, once they start considering heat pumps. But if a project isn't going electric or whatnot, then I think that it's just the direction that transition is needed to plan for. And hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. And I just want to add one thought. I don't know if this again will be something the board thinks they need to consider, but on the physical space for the condensing unit in multifamily, an issue I ran into in my unit, I'm in the middle floor, is that the outdoor condenser spits out water. And in the middle of the winter, you can't have the outdoor condensing unit dropping water all over your neighbor's patio. And so I was told, and others correct me if I'm wrong, if this isn't what your experience is, that I would need a drain pathway provided out of my patio for that water so that it wouldn't freeze over my neighbor's patio. And that it also might need heat tape in the winter to make sure that it isn't just a frozen pipe. So I don't know if others have that experience, or if people can speak to actually the heat pump technology, if this is just what I heard from my contractor, but perhaps something to consider in the multifamily setting.
Yeah, sorry, this is Elizabeth. There's the condensate's typically only an issue in cooling mode, because that's when you get water condensing on that and on the cold oils, right? It condenses there and then it drips and whatnot. So I don't think that would be a special issue just for heat pumps or heating mode of that same condenser per se. There are condensate disposal requirements in the IMC, so I think that's already taken care of. A condenser is a condenser. In the eyes of the code, it doesn't care if it's cooling only or both heating and cooling. So I think we're covered there within what's already in the IMC. I don't see any special circumstances that might arise that we would need to consider.
Okay, thank you. Wasn't sure, so I appreciate that input. All right, so as far as the multifamily small commercial, right? We're thinking buildings under 10,000 square feet within this discussion, moving to large commercial at our next meeting. I am hearing that the expectation, the understanding from this board is that every individual dwelling unit in the multifamily setting needs to have the electric readiness if the appliance is within the space itself. If there's the sort of centralized appliance for heating, cooling, water heating, that still needs to be pre-wired for electrification, and that there is flexibility in designing systems to make sure that that's not that in and of itself isn't a huge barrier. Things we need to make sure we're considering is space for the physical transformer, if that upgrade needs to happen, similar to the EV capable light discussion that we had. Physical space for the condensing units in multifamily. And that's sort of what I've heard. So is there anything, I guess starting there, does that sound right to our board? Do we feel like that's, I've summarized that correctly?
I do want to clarify really quickly. We're talking about creating space for additional transformers, not actually installing additional transformers. Okay, thank you.
That's correct. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm thinking then that the board will likely fall, and correct me if I'm wrong, in as we're looking at these specific general open, keeping that middle ground again, where we're gonna specify some elements, but keep the language pretty open. I guess I'm not as familiar with designing commercial energy systems for commercial spaces, right? And transitioning away from the multifamily speak for just a bit, is language such as Denver has here, is that what the board would like to see or would recommend to keep things open and flexible for the commercial applications of electric ready? Any thoughts on that? Carolyn, and then I'll go Rob, and then I'll go Tim.
Yeah, I mean, I think what they're getting at is a full replacement in terms of load. And so I think that's our expectation for both residential and this topic. To the extent that we have to clarify it, I certainly support it. I think I would look to the outcomes of the residential we talked in terms of spacing and some of the other things is carrying forward here. Because some of your commercial is going to have the exact same appliances or some subset of appliances that are non-HVAC in them. And so we'd want those same 3-foot cavity provisions there to carry forward. And I think we want to envision the correct physical space I think that we need to allow for something that's different than 3-pole.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. Rob?
Yeah, I do kind of want to advocate for a similar similar pathway to what we chose for residential. I'm concerned about providing very specific guidance around capacity constraints, and on the other hand, if we leave it too open for interpretation, that it'd be too easy to meet the letter of the code without meeting the intent of the code.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And then we'll go to Tim.
I have a question before I guess I can make a comment. So the question would be, just to reiterate, this is for the smaller commercial buildings, 10,000 square foot or less. So the standard building that we see has gas-fired rooftop equipment, multiple units. So would this then require, well, I see Fort Collins with what it's called is like open, saying it must be pre-wired. Or is this saying you've got to just provide in the Denver, just provide the space to be able to accommodate converting one or all of those existing gas-fired rooftop equipment to some sort of an electrical unit, whether it's outside or up on the roof? Is that, so that's a question. I don't know if I asked that question very well.
I was going to say, do you want to give it another crack? Because I'm not sure I followed the question.
So so the standard building, commercial building we have is gas-fired rooftop equipment across the board, everyone, whether it's industrial or retail or office. So this section would then be requiring to be electric ready for that HVAC air handlers to be converted. Is that a better question?
Yeah, yes, that makes sense. And yes, the answer is yes. Any gas-fired combustion equipment would need to be pre-wired, panel capacity, all of our elements for the future electrification.
And so with Denver's language, they are requiring just the panel sized adequately to accommodate whatever that is that's going to be converted.
So theirs says the junction box, raceway, and bus bar in the electric panel and conductors serving the electric panel. So both of those pieces, or all of those pieces, need to be sized to accommodate the electric equipment to serve the same load as the fossil fuel equipment. So it's not just the panel, but it's also the raceway and the bus bar in the panel need to be properly sized.
So one more question, sorry. So that Denver language is then also requiring the raceway and the junction box to the location of where that gas-fired piece of equipment is up on the roof.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I'm hearing we like the Denver approach. And Carolyn, I apologize. You shared a note on the 3-pole circuit breaker, and I missed it because I was grabbing what else you were saying. Can you repeat that?
Yes. So there's other gas combustion appliances that may go into both of these scenarios, small commercial and multifamily, that are something other than an RTU, rooftop RTU. That would require more of a 220 dual 2-pole circuit breaker. So that's the clarification, is this is specific to RTU replacement and requirements. I think, unless I'm missing it, I think we're addressing other appliances here as well.
Okay, so your comment is that 3-pole is really specific to RTUs, and there might be other, that might not be the correct language to use because there's other equipment out there that doesn't.
Right, you could have a gas tanked water heater or a stove, a gas stove, depending on what the commercial application is.
Okay. So then in that case, I guess the question that would begs the question for me of, do we want to specify 2 or 3 pole circuit breaker broken down, it sounds like it would need to be broken down by sort of appliance type, or do we want to, in the residential section, we've specified a minimum of 2 pole. We could repeat that language here, knowing that people could go bigger. Any thoughts on how to approach that specific piece? Yeah, Tim. Tim, you're muted still.
Sorry about that. That was a good point. I was keyed in just on the rooftop equipment, but absolutely there are gas-fired water heaters, there's gas-fired different units going in. We also have the discussion on commercial kitchens. They're typically gas-fired, which I'm assuming we're going to get an exception in, like I've seen even on some of the communities that have done all electrification. So with all that being said, I maybe go back from saying a 3-pole circuit breaker and coming up with more generic language that a breaker size, adequate breaker size, physical space for a breaker that would adequately handle whatever piece of equipment that is.
And I support Tim's and specifying a minimum 2 pole. That's my amendment. So size appropriately, not less than 2 pole.
Okay. All right. Thank you both. Any thoughts from others on the board on whether that is an approach that they agree with? I see Kevin's agreement in the chat. Maybe Ron, a couple head nods, others. Anyone want to speak out against that as a suggestion? Tim.
I don't want to speak out against it, sorry. I'm not going to do a 180. And I'm not sure if we're going to have the next slide or two talk about location. Like, we just went around with the 6-foot rule. Is that discussion coming up?
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So any thoughts? Breaker, physical space for a breaker that's sized appropriately with a minimum of a 2-pole breaker. Anyone disagree with that statement? All right, I'm not hearing any. So, Kevin, I did want to get clarification on the note you included in the chat, just to make sure I'm understanding what you say. When you shared, let's please be sure to say space or capacity with respect to the transformers. Can you just clarify that comment for me?
Yeah, and I just ground space versus capacity. So if we wrote that there has to be space for another transformer, that could leave out space that might never have to be used. So in other words, the transformer might have adequate capacity. A lot of these big projects have 2 of them, and maybe Excel will downsize them rather than having like a big one and a little one. But I think if you say, make sure there's space, that leaves you to having to leave a chunk of land open. And I think that's not preferable. I'd say make sure there's capacity, because a developer might choose to say, and this is where they'd have to squabble with Ron at Excel and all our friends there, to say, I want to upsize these transformers. And then they might say, no, we can't because there's not enough room down the line or whatever. But to say that there's space for it only, I think could create an unintended consequence. We need capacity in the transformers to be able to fire this future stuff. You may or may not need space. Is that clear?
It is clear. Thank you for clarifying that. And I wanted to just make sure that is in line with what Rob was sharing earlier. So I'm not getting my wires crossed, no pun intended. Rob, is that what you were getting at as well, with the making sure we have enough space or capacity for the future electrification?
It's a more complicated response than that. It's more complicated than I can probably say in a sentence. In fact, it's complicated enough I'd have to actually speak with our distribution engineering team before I actually weigh in with my 2 cents. So I apologize for punting, but I do need to ask for clarification. I need to speak to some of my internal colleagues for clarification on that.
Okay, no, I appreciate your upfrontness and please let us know. We can make sure to touch base on that in our next meeting. Okay, so Tim, Elizabeth, or Carolyn, Elizabeth, you just unmuted. I'm getting all my names mixed up. Did you want to respond directly to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say I don't have Rob's depth of knowledge there, but just to kind of tag on to Kevin's comment there, it's a little bit of both physical space and capacity. We have a challenge, at least in Excel's territory, where we're limited to 4,000 amps per transformer cabinet. So there's both a capacity and a physical space challenge. And then once you get over 4,000 amps, you do have to have additional physical space. And as of today, at least no one has had any success getting greater than 4,000 amps in a single transformer cabinet, even if you could physically fit a larger capacity transformer within that cabinet. So it is a bit of both. I wouldn't want to negate the physical space, but I think they're tied, if that makes sense.
And maybe it could be capacity and or space. I don't know how that's not a very favorable thing from a code language point of view. But I just hate to see us, maybe there is a point, Elizabeth, down the line where whatever the next step up, 7,500 is available, and all of a sudden you do have the capacity and changing that out. So
yeah, it's
capacity,
a hard one. We have to design to what we know today. If I'm an electrical engineer, I can't, look at my 4,000 amp transformer and say that, yes, I have capacity. And I don't think that would be very enforceable by inspectors and jurisdictions and stuff. So I think you could say capacity without saying physical space. And then since sort of by default, if that pushes into a second cabinet, you have to create the space for that capacity, physical space for that capacity.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of saying, like let capacity be the driver, because if you need 4,500 and you only have 4,000 available, then therefore you don't have capacity, so you need the space. But if you need 2,500 and your load only adds 1,000 more, you might have capacity within that box.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay.
Sorry to jump over Ron and Carolyn there. Apologies.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's starting to click. I'll go Ron and then we'll go to Carolyn.
I guess I'm just a little confused. Why wouldn't we say space and capacity? Because we don't want to be limited by either one. We need both in some cases. And so, so we need space and capacity. So we're not limited.
Please.
Go ahead. And it goes back again. This is, granted, Denver architect here. It's a space consideration primarily, Ron. If we leave space, if you cut out the 12 by 15 space that's required for a transformer after you get all these clearances and everything around it, and it's never used, that's a lost opportunity, or I don't know, a nice bike parking spot. So I'm trying to avoid the situation where we have to block out space for something that might never go there. That's my hesitance about the space.
I guess I'm not. If you say that if there already is space, though, then you wouldn't need any more space, would you?
I mean, if we're sizing a building for 2 transformers, we size it for 2 transformers, unless we know that the electrification would kick it into the need for a third. So I don't want to have to set aside that space that's basically on the ground and open to the sky forever. Amen. Because you might never need that.
So to clarify, you're saying if the future electrification capacity would kick it to 3 transformers, you would still provide the physical. Would you provide the physical space for that transformer? Or is that where you would back off and say, we don't want the space for that transformer if we don't know if things are going to electrify?
Yeah, or if there's future flexibility in what you can provide. I mean, if you could change out the transformer to a higher capacity and avoid the need for a third or a second, from a space point of view in a condensed urban setting, that's going to be preferable. And Tim had a question related to this too. Just can you stack these things up? And generally, I would say no. I'm sure Rob would kind of giggle at that if he talked to some of the engineers. You can put these things in vaults under the building, But it's really, that's where Excel requirements at least get really crazy. So.
Okay. Ron, I want to make sure your question got answered. Do you feel like you are understanding?
I guess I'm still maybe missing something here. So if you build the building and you have the two transformers that are required, we still want to make sure we have both space and capacity as needed. Now, if the existing setup has the capacity, then it also by definition means it also has the space. So you're always going to be meeting that standard. If you have the capacity, you have the capacity and the space, and vice versa. So I think if we name both space and capacity, it can either be met by what's there already, or maybe you do need to preserve some additional space if that system is not sized to handle the potential additional.
I see where you're coming from. You could consider that both ways. Because if you have two and there's room in the second, then you do have capacity and space, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Interesting.
Okay. Carolyn and then Elizabeth.
Sorry, I train wrecked us this
No,
one,
that
guys.
was good.
I apologize.
This is good to see.
This is a question for Elizabeth and Kevin. If you have to install those circuits and pre-wire them and have them terminate in an outlet or junction box, is there any scenario that you aren't also required to deliver the capacity to serve those outlets in the form of a appropriately sized transformer on the site?
There's one case that I can think of, and I'm not an electrical engineer, so I'm getting a little bit out of my lane, but like picture, say, a multifamily building with lots of individual electric hot water heaters. There you're allowed, and I'm going to forget the word, but you do not have to design for 100% capacity of every single one of those.
Diversification.
Diversification. Thank you, Ron. So there is a case where yes, you might have, a certain capacity of if everyone used 100% of their hot water all the time, but that never happened. So that would be one case.
Yeah. So let me clarify my question. You still have to design with that diversification in mind, right? So you would be appropriately sizing the service for an all electric. So my question is more, if you aren't putting in hot water heat, but you are putting in circuits for hot water heat, don't you have to model the diversified heating loads to size that circuit? And wouldn't you then have to provide the capacity to serve that circuit or not?
Yeah, and I think that, again, probably better for the electrical engineer to answer. Go ahead.
I might be able to take a running stab at this one.
Thanks,
with all caveats that I'm not necessarily be held entirely accountable to my response. I don't think this is something I did talk about with our electric team yesterday, and it's sized based on connected load. So if it's a circuit that is not connected to an end use today, the power supply we treat the power supply design as zero for that. So at some point in the future, if I had to distill it to a catchphrase that again, similarly shouldn't be held accountable for its veracity, the circuit is designed to be right sized for right now. So if that's a sufficient quip for the way that electric supply is kind of designed, for the way that the distribution engineers have discussed about the way that they set up power supply.
I would argue it is a connected load if it's wired and there's a circuit breaker. So that's my clarification. I realize we're probably not going to get there, and weirdly Kim disappeared from my screen.
I'm here.
Don't worry. I was like, wait, I got very uncomfortable there.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah. I think maybe appropriate consideration for serving those circuits in terms of future capacity and space maybe is a compromise I'd offer.
Yeah, it gets because I don't want to write a check that I have to cash later. It becomes problematic if we start oversizing for loads that are not immediately if we start oversizing for loads that are not of immediate function, I guess.
And Rob, you're talking about things that are then upstream of the building provided equipment,
transformers, substations, feeders, transmission to the substation, everything upstream from there. Yes, that's correct.
But things that are provided by the builder, by the design team, the things that are on site, we don't say all the EV charging and electric ready stuff would potentially push us into a third transformer cabinet. I would argue, I hate to use space that isn't used right now, but I think we do have to reserve that space, because if we don't, we can't connect all the capacity and all this work that we're doing in the rest of the building. If there's nowhere to physically connect it, what's the point, right?
Right. And I'm not arguing. I'm definitely not making an argument that there shouldn't be a provision for future infrastructural needs. Just be really to be clear.
Yeah, and I think whatever Excel provides upstream is under different rules, different regulations than what we provide within, at our sightline. And I think that does probably mean we have to reserve some space that maybe doesn't get used. I don't think it's going to be used never. I think it'll be used someday. It might, whenever that happens is a question, but I think it will get used eventually. And if we don't leave that physical space, that's our biggest challenge right now with our urban buildings, is there is no physical space. So, all these electrification requirements that we're dealing with are really hamstrung by that lack of physical space for that third, fourth, fifth transformer on the site.
Okay, so I am hearing that there's definitely a need for the physical space component. It is 2:59, so I just want to flag that this is where our conversation is going to end today. But appreciate the discussion as always. And I want to remind everybody before you jump off, Aaron, I know you got to run, that homework is coming. The draft code language packages will be sent today. And along with the survey. So do not forget the March 2nd deadline. It will be the day after our next meeting. So I will be there to hound you about it if I haven't heard from you. But take the time spent on your calendars next week to really dive into that. So thank you guys. And I'll say enjoy the rest of your Thursdays, I think it is. Great to see you guys as always. And we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Kim and team, do you want to just hop on just really quick to a Google meeting really quick? I'll send one.
That sounds perfect. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, guys.